Chapter 2779. 2779 Boss Yuan. Chapter 2779. 2779 Boss Yuan. 2779 Boss Yuan. Ling Han calmly walked away after teaching the 7 people a lesson. They weren't worth any more of his time. In any case, it would be best if these people learned from their mistakes and changed their ways. If they still persisted, however, and if they still insisted on harassing him, he would kill them without any hesitation. Ling Han returned inside the barrier, where he continued to cultivate. There were a total of 8 heavenly venerable seals in his mind, and circulating together, that could aid him in communicating with heaven and earth. This would allow him to extract a large amount of fundamental power, thereby helping him raise his cultivation. Ling Han reached some sort of understanding. It was likely that he could never cultivate the first tier to the pinnacle level. This was because no such pinnacle existed. Each cell in the body could be viewed as an individual dimension that could continue to grow stronger and stronger. There was neither any limit nor end. In other words, reaching the so-called pinnacle was reaching the limit of power of a given dimension. In that case, how many years would it take to reach the absolute pinnacle? If I want to, I can most likely advance to the second tier at any time I please, Ling Han said to himself. He was in a strange state right now. He could already manipulate void particle energy since long ago, and he was more so able to manipulate the power of dimensions at this moment. Thus, he could already be regarded as a second tier, heavenly venerate. However, I feel like I still haven't reached a level of great accomplishment in the first tier. Many of my powers of dimensions are extremely fragile, and they still need to be nurtured for a long period of time. Otherwise, once void particle energy enters my body, these cells might shatter and collapse due to their inability to host this power. That will be a huge loss. So I need to take things step by step. Ling Han told himself to calm down and be patient. Right now, his cultivation mainly relied on his own body, where the dimensions inside him combined together to form a whole. No one could help him. Several days later, he suddenly received a letter challenging him to battle. This challenge had been issued by a person called Yuan Yinglong, inviting him to a battle on 4 Seas Mountain outside the city 3 days later. This is most likely Boss Yuan, right? Ling Han thought with a shake of his head. Unexpectedly, the 7 people still failed to learn their lesson. So be it a battle then. Ling Han accepted this challenge. He believed that no one in the 2nd level or even 3rd level could rival him. Of course, it was also possible that there was someone as freakish as him, being able to rival those at the 2nd or 3rd tier while still at the 1st tier. No, they couldn't possibly rival those at the 3rd tier. Ling Han was filled with confidence. He had spent so long and experienced so many failures, and he had only succeeded after almost succumbing to death. He refused to believe that this could be replicated. 3 days later, he was accompanied to 4 Seas Mountain by the Empress. Ling Han, a battle on the mountain! A clear voice called out from the mountain peak. Ling Han nodded to the Empress and the others before taking a single stride, which immediately brought him to the top of the mountain. What he saw was a young man standing there, tall and solid in stature, with black hair billowing and determination etched on his face. There was an indescribable air of exuberance and triumph about him. "Let me first apologize for my good-for-nothing underlings," the man said, even bowing in apology. Ling Han was slightly astonished by this. He nodded and said, "I've already taught them a lesson. However, as their boss, I naturally can't remain calm after seeing them being bullied. Thus, I still have to challenge Brother Ling to a battle," Yuan Yinglong said. He clasped his hands and continued, "If you can't block my fists, then you'll have to suffer a beating." Ling Han laughed and replied, "Then show me what you've got." Pum! With a soft roar, Yuan Yinglong immediately charged at Ling Han. He threw a punch, drawing on the unique power of heaven and earth. Combined with his own strength, this formed the most powerful attack in the Genesis world. Even divine metal would be crushed into smithereens by this attack. Ling Han also replied with a punch. Pung, pung, pung. The two of them became locked in a ferocious battle. Sure enough, your strength is quite extraordinary, Yuan Yinglong said loudly. His voice boomed with confidence as he continued. But I'm even more powerful. His punches became even more rapid. Ling Han casually blocked these strikes. This Yuan Yinglong was indeed very powerful, with his battle prowess definitely exceeding that of ordinary first-tier heavenly venerates. However, he was still far inferior to Ling Han. If Ling Han wanted to, he could obliterate this person with a single punch. However, he felt like Yuan Yinglong was a fairly decent person since he understood the need to apologize and the need to stand up for his underlings. This raised Ling Han's opinion of him. After throwing several hundred punches, and yet still failing to capture Ling Han, Yuan Yinglong resolutely summoned a heavenly venerate tool and channeled a heavenly venerate technique. A dazzling saber projection slashed forth. This was a heavenly venerate technique, so its might was naturally great. Ling Han also drew on some more power, maintaining an equal footing with his opponent. Yuan Yinglong's expression instantly changed. Even though they had been evenly matched just then, Yuan Yinglong had only regarded this as Ling Han being as powerful as himself. Now, however, Yuan Yinglong had already summoned a heavenly venerate tool, and even unleashed a heavenly venerate technique. Just how much had his battle prowess increased? Yet, without summoning any weapon, and without using any powerful technique, Ling Han was still able to rival him with ease. That being the case, just how powerful would he be if he unleashed his full strength? Yuan Yinglong knew that he had already lost, yet he was unwilling to yield before finding out Ling Han's true power. Thus he let out a roar, with several symbols materializing on his chest. These are heavenly venerable seals. Even though they were fuzzy, Ling Han was still able to recognize them, as these were the first few heavenly venerable seals that he had mastered. They had been provided by the divine demon sword. These 7 heavenly venerable seals were also the most widely known ones, as they would be revealed once a devouring metal underwent its final transformation. Thus, they weren't difficult for heavenly venerates to obtain. Heavenly venerable seals, heavenly venerate tool, and heavenly venerate technique. Just how powerful was the combination of these 3? So terrifying that it could rival the second tier. Yet, Ling Han remained calm and composed as he blocked this attack, not appearing strained in the least. I've lost, Yuan Yinglong said, a complicated expression on his face as he voluntarily stopped his attacks. He was a prodigy, and back in his own dimension, he was more so the most prodigious talent of all time. After arriving here, however, even though he was still able to make a name for himself, he was no longer worthy of the title of strongest. Ling Han nodded and waved his hand in acknowledgement. He then turned around to leave. Wait, Yuan Yinglong said, taking a step forward. Ling Han turned around, smiling and asking, What's wrong? You want another battle? Yuan Yinglong hurriedly shook his head and replied, No, I simply want to invite Brother Ling to some place. Ling Han wore a strange expression, remaining silent as he looked at Yuan Yinglong and waited for him to continue. Yuan Yinglong faltered for a moment before eventually coming to his senses. Rest assured, I'm definitely not trying to trick Brother Ling into going somewhere for ulterior purposes. He paused for a moment before saying, I want to invite Brother Ling to explore a mystery realm together. Oh! Ling Han was slightly surprised. Yuan Yinglong was already a heavenly venerate, so why did he still want to go to a mystery realm? Perhaps there actually existed treasures that could speed up the cultivation of heavenly venerates, or even help them advance. No such thing existed. Heavenly venerates suffered jealousy from heaven and earth, so how could heaven and earth possibly nurture such treasures for them? Heavenly venerable seals, Yuan Yinglong said with a serious expression. Ling Han found this even stranger. Couldn't heavenly venerable seals only be cultivated by oneself? There are two ways to nurture heavenly venerable seals. The first is through elites comprehending heaven and earth, and thus forming them through their grand wisdom. The second is through a special environment, Yuan Inglong explained. It's extremely difficult to form such a special environment. Firstly, it must be free from the influence of heaven and earth. Ling Han nodded in understanding. Heavenly venerates suffered jealousy from heaven and earth, and this was the case even in the transcendent dimension. This is a place where the two dimensions meet, which renders it free from both the influence of hysteria and the influence of the flaming frost realm. As such, it satisfies the first condition, Yuan Inglong said. Chapter 2780 2780 Yuan Inglong's Invitation. Chapter 2780 2780 Yuan Inglong's Invitation. 2780 Yuan Inglong's Invitation. Ling Han nodded and asked, "Then what's the second condition?" Yuan Inglong didn't reply straight away. Instead, he started to tell a story saying, several epochs ago, an earth-shattering battle took place. At that time, a chaotic spatial overlap suddenly occurred between the fourth spatial level and this level, resulting in a large number of third-tier elites from Hysteria's army appearing here. At that time, the power of dimension of the second level was extremely unstable. It was sometimes able to host those at the third tier, yet it was at other times unable to. Our camp at that time was also further ahead than it is now. However, it was quickly breached by Hysteria's army, and we were forced into a rapid retreat. After some time, we received reinforcements from the fourth level. It was only then that we were finally able to consolidate our position and engage in an intense final battle with Hysteria's army. Too many people, far too many, died in that battle. And just as the battle was about to conclude, another spatial change suddenly occurred. The entire battlefield vanished, and those who were still alive all attempted to escape the space. The two dimensions pressed together like a mill, and even third-tier heavenly venerates would be easily killed if they were caught. Countless years later, this space has actually emerged again. It hasn't completely appeared yet, but according to the estimates of the great elites, with the death of so many third-tier heavenly venerates and with countless years of their powers intertwining together, it's very likely that heavenly venerable seals have been formed. After telling this story, Yuan Inglong looked intently at Ling Han and said, "Brother Ling, I want to invite you to explore this mystery realm and search for heavenly venerable seals with me. Being something that could increase the speed of one's cultivation, heavenly venerable seals were far too important. Those like Lin Yolian and Wu Haoyang had definitely mastered a large number of heavenly venerable seals. Otherwise, they couldn't have surged to the fourth tier in just a measly 1 billion years." Ling Han pondered for a moment before replying, "Very well, then I'll have a look." Yuan Inglong was delighted upon hearing this. In reality, he only had a small bit of renown in the second spatial level, and his battle record was only just enough for him to enter the recent leaderboard, placing him in the 900s. Compared to those in his native dimension, he was naturally paramount and unrivaled. Here, however, there were many people stronger than him. Obtaining heavenly venerable seals could increase his battle prowess and also increase the speed of his cultivation. However, far too many people had their eyes on that place, so it was hard to say whether he could have the last laugh. With Ling Han's help, his chance of success was naturally far greater. Ling Han wore a faint smile as he looked at Yuan Inglong. This person was fairly thorough in his planning and actions. If Yuan Inglong had one, he naturally wouldn't have invited Ling Han. At the same time, he would have avenged his underlings and strengthened his prestige and reputation as their boss. If he lost, however, he could still obtain a powerful helper. It was no wonder he had carried himself with such an honorable demeanor. As it turned out, he had already planned for both possibilities. Yuan Inglong also smiled, though his smile was slightly awkward. He knew that Ling Han had seen through him. Ling Han waved his hand before calmly leaving. After arriving at the foot of the mountain and returning with the others, He told them of the situation regarding the mystery realm. That's extremely dangerous. Bewitching Maiden Row immediately said, "Who knows whether a spatial overlap will occur again, resulting in the arrival of a large number of third-tier elites from Hysteria's army." The Empress also nodded in agreement. She knew that Ling Han was powerful enough to rival third-tier heavenly venerates, perhaps even 10 at once. However, if Hysteria dispatched an army, would there only be a measly 10 or 23rd-tier elites? Thus, the possibility of a spatial overlap was an extremely dangerous proposition. Ling Han naturally knew this as well. This opportunity can't be missed. A single heavenly venerable seal can result in a cultivation speed difference of several folds. After advancing to the heavenly venerable tier, even their physique of time had been rendered useless. Indeed, regulations had no effect on heavenly venerates. Thus, advancing to the heavenly venerable tier was much like starting from zero again. No one had any advantage, and everything was determined by one's hard work and luck. Seeing that Ling Han had already made a decision, the Empress and Bewitching Maiden Row didn't try to persuade him anymore. Moreover, since a large number of heavenly venerates died in that place, there are definitely many heavenly venerate tools. "I'll grab a few for you guys," Ling Han said. It was possible that heavenly venerable seals existed in the mystery realm. However, this was only speculation from others. Meanwhile, it was almost certain that there were many heavenly venerate tools, regardless of whether they had been smashed into shards or not. In any case, they had all been forged from devouring metal, so it was entirely possible to fuse a few of them together to forge a new tool. Ling Han also informed the Rain Emperor, the Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable, and the others about the situation, allowing them to decide whether they wanted to go or not. After a dozen or so days, Yuan Yinglong came over to inform Ling Han that they were about to set off. And thereupon, Ling Han also brought his companions with him as he set off. In addition to him and the Empress, there was also Ling Jianxue, the Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable, the Rain Emperor, the large black dog, and the black donkey. "What's with your expressions, little brats? Can't this lord go, huh?" The black donkey huffed when he saw everyone's strange expression. "Senior, as someone who accompanies Lord Zhou, how can you be short of heavenly venerable seals?" Ling Han asked with a smile. Even though he was already at the first tier and far more powerful than the black donkey, he was a person who treasured old ties, so he still treated the black donkey with respect. The black donkey sighed and said, "Do you people know how heavenly venerable seals are passed on? They're directly dug out from one's divine sense, causing one to lose it forever. In other words, heavenly venerable seals can only be passed on. They can't be taught. That brat Zhou dug out 3 heavenly venerable seals for this lord. But just what kind of donkey am I? Will I be willing to receive so many benefits from that brat?" Everyone was rendered speechless. In fact, even the large black dog started to whistle as he turned his head to the sky. The large black dog and the black donkey were both as despicable and depraved as could be. Yet the black donkey actually dared to say that he was unwilling to receive too many benefits from someone? Just how shameless could he be? In any case, the black donkey wasn't afraid to let everyone know that he possessed 3 heavenly venerable seals. After all, they were from Zhou, so who dared to covet them? In fact, 6th-tier heavenly venerates could resist the pressure caused by the overlap of 2 dimensions, so they could directly charge from the 1st level through to the 7th level, their battle prowess not diminishing in the process. That being the case, who dared to provoke such a paramount being? Thus, even though the black donkey was only a 1st-tier heavenly venerate, he was even more imposing and impressive than many 4th-tier and 5th-tier heavenly venerates. This was because everyone was aware of his good relationship with Zhou. They were like brothers. Yuan Yinglong also brought along his own underlings. They were all embarrassed when they saw Ling Han, and they all offered their apologies. It was clear that they had already been instructed by Yuan Yinglong on what to do. Let's go. Many people have their eyes set on that place, so we can't waste any time, Yuan Yinglong said. Once a heavenly venerable seal was mastered by someone, it could only be passed on and not taught. Thus, they had to immediately observe and study these seals the moment they appeared. They set off, heading toward the depths of where the two dimensions collided. After entering the war with Hysteria, their defensive lines had continued to retreat again and again. Even though the Flaming Frost realm was extremely large, there would eventually come a day when they would have nowhere else to retreat. Upon thinking of this, everyone became solemn and silent. At the same time, they also felt an intense thirst for paramount power that could turn the tables on Hysteria. The further they ventured, the darker their surroundings became. The environment gradually became grotesque and bizarre, appearing completely different from the Flaming Frost realm that they were familiar with. This was because this region was being assimilated and engulfed by Hysteria. As a result, the regulations of the Flaming Frost realm were no longer effective here. It was as if they had entered a different dimension. Everyone felt uneasy. They couldn't draw on the power of dimensions, nor could they replenish their own power. This was an extremely dangerous situation. Fortunately, this area hadn't been fully assimilated by Hysteria, after all, so there was still a sliver of power from the Flaming Frost realm. This affected their battle prowess and their recovery speed, but it was definitely still better than nothing. 3 months later, they finally arrived at their destination. Chapter 2781, 2781 Black Waterfall Mountain. Chapter 2781, 2781 Black Waterfall Mountain. 2781 Black Waterfall Mountain. This mystery realm was called Black Waterfall Mountain. Ling Han looked up, and a towering mountain entered his vision, its height supreme and unknown. Even with his powerful vision, he was still unable to see its peak. It was as if there were no end in sight. Meanwhile, a black waterfall draped down from the waist of the mountain, the noise that it created deafening and earth-shattering. This waterfall was astonishing, with innumerable heavenly bodies surging through it. In fact, Ling Han was even able to see living beings on these heavenly bodies. However, these swathes of lands were all protected by layers of light, which prevented them from being shattered. Just how tall was this waterfall? As these heavenly bodies fell down, they were actually able to nurture living beings. This is Black Waterfall Mountain. In the Battle of Ur, the power of the heavenly venerates was absolutely petrifying, and they completely transformed the terrain of this area. In fact, they might have even shattered the void and made contact with some other dimensions, thereby resulting in these falling lands, Yuan Yinglong explained. He had clearly done his research on this area, so he was aware of many fine details. Everyone nodded in understanding. As they gazed at the towering mountain, they all felt a sense of awe and respect. "Where's the entrance?" Ling Han asked. "Walking against the flow of the waterfall, the entrance will be at its end," Yuan Yinglong replied. Whoosh! Just as they were about to set off, several figures soared over and stopped not far away from them. Yuan Yinglong glanced over, and his pupils involuntarily contracted. "Lu Shishuang," he exclaimed. "Who?" Ling Han casually asked. "Father, you can't focus solely on cultivation and ignore everything else," Ling Jinshua said with a shake of his head. "Lu Shishuang is an elite ranked in the top 300 on the recent leaderboard. This leaderboard wasn't a battle prowess leaderboard or strength leaderboard, but in some sense it was indeed something of the sort. After all, without enough power, how could one kill enough enemies and earn enough points? Perhaps those ranked in the top dozen or 2 dozen wouldn't be too far apart in strength. In fact, it was even possible that those who were stronger were ranked lower. This was also up to luck. However, the further apart in rank, the less it would be a problem of luck. Instead, it would genuinely be a representation of difference in power. Since Lu Shishuang was ranked in the top 300, His strength was definitely far superior to that of Yuan Yinglong. Of course, there were hundreds of thousands of heavenly venerates here, so just being able to enter the leaderboard itself was already proof enough of one's extraordinary power. Lu Shishuang didn't take so much as a glance at Ling Han and the others. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on the black waterfall that was descending from the skies. However, those beside him were filled with arrogance as they swept their gazes over Ling Han and the others. This was especially the case with the Empress, where their eyes lingered the longest. The Empress had already been breathtakingly beautiful to begin with. Now that she had advanced to the heavenly venerable tier, she was more so elegant and noble in appearance, and it was as if she were born with a dazzling halo that possessed infinite attraction. Ling Han was displeased, and he shot daggers at these people. "Brother Ling, don't be rash," Yuan Yinglong hurriedly said. He naturally wouldn't give a toss about those measly underlings. However, Lu Shishuang was far too terrifying. As someone ranked in the top 300, Lu Shishuang could dispose of Yuan Yinglong in under 100 exchanges. However, would Ling Han pay any heed to him? He couldn't accept it, even if these people were only having sexual fantasies about his wife. Look not at that which contradicts etiquette. Did they not understand this concept? He positioned himself before the Empress, blocking their gazes. With his heavenly venerable tier power, those people were naturally unable to look through him and stare at the Empress. "Brat, move aside!" one of them roared at Ling Han. "Heh, she's your wife? She's fairly beautiful. However, isn't it too selfish to hog her to yourself?" "Nice things need to be shared," another person said. His words were extremely demeaning and humiliating. Ling Han had only been displeased just then. Now he was furious. These two people weren't heavenly venerates, and they were only ninth heaven celestial kings. Yet they actually dared to ridicule a heavenly venerate in public. Their impudence and courage weren't based on their own power, but instead based on the power of the person behind them, Lu Shishuang. Their arrogance definitely hadn't been nurtured in just a day or two. With such wanton disregard for others, it was certain that their actions were tacitly approved by Lu Shishuang. While inside the barrier, things had still been all right. After all, they all possessed the same goal of battling against hysteria. With the looming danger gone, however, their minds immediately started to wander. This was to be expected. They weren't members of an army with strict rules and regulations, so how could they maintain an eternal goal and forge eternal cooperation? Ling Han strode toward Lu Shishuang and his underlings. "Brother Ling," Yuan Yinglong called, reaching out with a grabbing motion. However, he failed to stop Ling Han, and he could only furrow his brows. He knew that Ling Han was powerful, but Lu Shishuang was no ordinary person either. He was an elite ranked in the top 300 on the recent leaderboard. Once they collided, it was truly difficult to say who would emerge victorious. Would Ling Han listen to Yuan Yinglong's persuasion? If Yuan Yinglong could remain calm when others humiliated his wife, could he still be called a man? "What's wrong? Want to fight?" The two ninth heaven celestial kings said immaturely. They weren't afraid of Ling Han at all. "Don't ask for trouble." Ling Han took another 2 steps forward. At this moment, another person stepped forward in front of the two ninth heaven celestial kings. This person was a heavenly venerate. He was blocky in stature, and he appeared as steady as a mountain. "Move aside," Ling Han said. "Scram!" the blocky heavenly venerate also roared. "If you dare to take another step, I'll be sure to teach you a lesson." Ling Han chuckled and replied, "I genuinely don't believe you." He then took another step forward. "Humph." The heavenly venerate lashed out, throwing a fist that caused even heaven and earth to tremor. His fist transformed into a large mountain as it smashed toward Ling Han. Ling Han snapped his fingers. Pum! The fist projection instantly shattered, and Ling Han continued to march forward. The blocky heavenly venerate faltered upon seeing this. His strike had already been extremely powerful, so how had it been blocked with such ease? Feng Hongjian, what's going on? Didn't have enough for lunch? A ninth heaven celestial king jeered. Exactly. Don't they call you the Invincible Fist? The other ninth heaven celestial king said. The blocky heavenly venerate was called Feng Hongjian, and a hint of displeasure flashed across his eyes. These two ninth heaven celestial kings were both younger cousins of Lu Shishuang, and it was thanks to Lu Shishuang's protection that they had become so arrogant and wanton. They even dared to mock heavenly venerates. However, who told Lu Shishuang to be so lenient toward them? If he wanted to follow Lu Shishuang, then he would have to put up with these two stupid fools. Another heavenly venerate stepped forward and said, "Let me deal with him." He was slender in stature, and he was so handsome and beautiful that he almost looked like a woman. "I'm Lian Jinqing, here to ask for some guidance." Ling Han remained silent and unfazed. In any case, he would definitely pummel those two annoying people. Seeing Ling Han's silence, Lian Jinqing rapidly rubbed his palms together. Wang! A blinding light surged forth. He was channeling a heavenly venerate technique. His companion's attack had been easily blocked by Ling Han just then, so he decided to immediately unleash a powerful attack. Boom! He threw a punch, with his fist transforming into a golden purple hammer that smashed toward Ling Han. Ling Han snapped his fingers. Pum! The hammer instantly crumbled. Upon seeing this, the heavenly venerates on Lu Shishuang's side were all astonished. To block a heavenly venerate technique with such ease, this person seemed to possess unfathomable power. Even Lu Shishuang retracted his gaze and turned around to look at Ling Han. "You're Ling Han?" he asked. "That's right," Ling Han replied with a nod. "Tell those two to apologize, and I'll let things slide. I'll only give them a beating." "In your dreams." "Preposterous." The two ninth heaven celestial kings chided him in unison. It was as if they had suffered a great injustice. Chapter 2782. 2782. Disciplining on Lu Shishuang's behalf. Chapter 2782. 2782. Disciplining on Lu Shishuang's behalf. 2782. Disciplining on Lu Shishuang's behalf. Lu Shishuang was also extremely displeased, saying, "My people never bow their heads to others." "Oh, even if they've committed the gravest sin?" Ling Han asked calmly. "Of course." Lu Shishuang said with pride, "That's your own misfortune and bad luck." With such leniency and protection, it was no wonder those two people had turned out like that. The two ninth heaven celestial kings were extremely smug. They had followed their older cousins since a young age and made a significant amount of emotional investment. Thus, Lu Shishuang was also extremely protective of them. Otherwise, they couldn't have advanced to the ninth heaven so quickly. It was also because of this that they came with Lu Shishuang to the realm battlefield, regardless of how dangerous it was. They were confident that Lu Shishuang would definitely keep them safe and allow them to continue their lavish and wanton life. In fact, they were also people with aspirations, and they felt like bullying normal people was far too boring and lacking in sense of achievement. Otherwise, as ninth heaven celestial kings, where couldn't they act smugly and freely? Ling Han shook his head, saying, "By the looks of it, it's not only the two of them who need a lesson." Impudence! Lu Shishuang's underlings all bellowed. In their eyes, Lu Shishuang was someone who couldn't be slandered. In their countless battles, Lu Shishuang had saved them heaven knew how many times. This caused them to feel grateful and indebted, so they were all willing to become his underlings. Lu Shishuang smiled and said, "Ling Han, I've heard of you before. You once performed a miracle in the first spatial level. However, this isn't the first level, and there are numerous people more powerful than you. You're nothing in this level." "Oh, so what you're trying to say is that you're more powerful than me?" Ling Han mused. "Of course," Lu Shishuang replied with pride. I don't believe so, Ling Han said as he strode forward, reaching out to grab Lu Shishuang. How audacious, Lu Shishuang said with a humph. He also reached out to grab at Ling Han's wrist. Pung! The two of them exchanged a blow, and Lu Shishuang's expression instantly changed. It was as if his fingers had collided with an iron sheet as they were sent bouncing back. In fact, it was as if the bones in his fingers were about to shatter from the contact. This was an indescribably painful experience. Even more shocking was the fact that Ling Han's hand continued to shoot forward, grabbing at his neck. You've gone too far, Lu Shishuang roared. He could accept defeat, but having someone grab his neck would be utter humiliation. It would become a stain on his life forever. He couldn't tolerate this. Whoa! His chest lit up, transforming into a fuzzy symbol. Time was against him, so it was already too late for him to unleash a heavenly venerate technique. However, he could channel his heavenly venerable seals with a single thought. Boom! A beam of light erupted from his chest, shooting at Ling Han. Humph! Ling Han turned his palm and made a slight knocking motion, immediately shattering the beam of light. Barely affected at all, his hand continued to aim at Lu Shishuang's neck. Lu Shishuang's expression changed again. He hadn't expected that even his heavenly venerable seals would fail to block Ling Han. However, he had already unleashed all of his attacks at this moment, so he could only watch helplessly as Ling Han's hand shot over and wrapped around his neck, lifting him up. Gasp! Everyone was transfixed with shock, their jaws on the ground. That was a powerful elite ranked in the top 300 on the recent leaderboard. Yet, like with an eagle catching a chick, he had been easily captured by Ling Han with a single palm. He hadn't been able to resist at all. Ling Han, you're taking things too far, Lu Shishuang bellowed. He was unwilling to suffer such humiliation. Whoa! He summoned his heavenly venerate tool, preparing to fight to the death. Too far, your mom, Ling Han replied. With a shake of his right hand, Lu Shishuang's bones instantly collided with each other. Pa pa pa! Lu Shishuang's bones were shattered, causing him to instantly lose his power and faint. Meanwhile, having lost connection with its owner, the heavenly venerate tool also dimmed, falling to the ground with a smack. In this second spatial level, the heavenly venerates were mostly all newly promoted ones, so it was naturally impossible for everyone to own their own heavenly venerate tool. Even though the Flaming Frost realm was a transcendent dimension, it was still impossible for it to produce so much devouring metal. The experienced heavenly venerates who had come from other dimensions naturally possessed their own heavenly venerate tools. However, only a pitiful few newbie heavenly venerates enjoyed such a privilege. Ling Han casually tossed Lu Shishuang aside before turning his gaze to the two ninth heaven celestial kings. His eyes were ice cold. This was a battlefield where brave cultivators resisted the invasion of hysteria. This was no playground for profligate youngsters. The existence of such people was a dishonor to those who had sacrificed themselves in this land. The two ninth heaven celestial kings were so terrified that they involuntarily started to shake. This result was far beyond their expectation. In the past, no matter how much trouble they caused, Lu Shishuang would always be there to resolve things for them. Moreover, they weren't stupid either, and they definitely wouldn't provoke those who were ranked in the top 500 on the recent leaderboard or those who were related to them. Thus, they had never come across any issues. Unexpectedly, however, they had hit a brick wall today. What do you want to do? The two of them asked in a quaking voice. They couldn't contain their fear. Ling Han swung his hand. Pa! With a single slap, both of them collapsed to the ground, their jaws gone. Blood jetted into the air, painting a sanguine and brutal picture. Odd! The two of them howled in agony. Since when had they ever suffered such pain before? Upon seeing this, Fong Hongdian and the others all felt delight in their minds. They had been itching to pummel these two forever. However, because of their relationship with Lu Shurshuang, their dreams to do so were nothing more than just that. Now, however, Ling Han was turning this into a reality for them. The only downside was that Lu Shurshuang had also been knocked unconscious by Ling Han. This made them feel extremely complicated, and they were unsure of how to face Ling Han. After slapping the two ninth heaven celestial kings for a while, Ling Han directly destroyed their celestial seeds and turned them into cripples. Dealing with such trash, he was already being lenient by letting them live. No, the two of them were both conscious, so after discovering that they had been crippled, they couldn't help but sob in inconsolable grief. Without their cultivation, how could they possibly block their immortal's tribulation? They would definitely be killed by heaven and earth. Ling Han ignored them as he returned to his original position beside Yuan Long and the others. At this moment, Yuan Long and his underlings all looked at Ling Han with different expressions. It was as if they weren't looking at a fellow heavenly venerate, but instead an elite from at least the third level. Let's go. They set off, advancing against the flow of the black waterfall and into the sky. This waterfall was far too long, and after flying for 3 entire days, they still had yet to see any signs of its peak. Only after flying for another 5 days did they finally arrive at the top of the waterfall. Here, there was a massive hole in the mountain from which the boundless black water surged out. As if it were connected to a large world, they could see countless broken shards of worlds rushing out with the water. On each side of the waterfall was a huge boulder where there were many people standing. These people were all brimming with a powerful and vast aura of dominance. Most of them were heavenly venerates. Ling Han and his companions also landed on the boulders. Yuan Long looked around, and he involuntarily sucked in a sharp breath. Who would have thought? Not only has this mystery realm attracted many prodigies from the recent leaderboard, but it's even attracted elites from the 3rd and 4th levels. Over there, he said as he pointed with his chin. That person in the red robe is the renowned Shizhanghe from the 4th level. He bears the title 9 Swords Demon Venerate, and he can kill any opponent within 9 strikes of his sword. And over there, the person in the long green dress, Yuan Long continued. She's Shi Mingyu, also a prodigy from the 4th level. I think she's also on the recent leaderboard, and she has the title Jade Flame Heavenly Venerate. Gasp! Far too many elites have come this time. Chapter 2783. 2783 Appearance of a Heavenly Venerable Seal. Chapter 2783. 2783 Appearance of a Heavenly Venerable Seal. 2783 Appearance of a Heavenly Venerable Seal. Yuan Long had initially thought that this would be a competition between the elites of the 2nd level. Unexpectedly, however, even elites from the 3rd and 4th level had been drawn over. We underestimated the appeal of heavenly venerable seals, Yuan Long said with a sigh. This was indeed the case. Even elites from the 3rd level and 4th level had come, and these people were all high and mighty in the eyes of those from the 2nd level. However, this is the 2nd level, and there's also the suppression from heaven and earth. To say nothing of them, even the lords from the 6th level will be suppressed if they come here, he remarked. Everyone nodded in agreement. If they battled here, even 5th-tier heavenly venerates wouldn't enjoy any advantage. Ling Han's gaze wandered around, and he asked, "Is there some sort of power suppression here? Why are all these people standing around and not entering?" "Let's ask." Yuan Long asked the people around them, and it wasn't long before they received an answer. As it turned out, there was huge pressure at the entrance of the cave, and the deeper one ventured, the greater this pressure would become. This pressure wasn't something that 1st-tier heavenly venerates could withstand. If they forcefully entered, they would simply be seeking death. Thus, everyone was waiting outside. Since this mystery realm had appeared, it signified a change in the environment of heaven and earth. In other words, they could definitely enter this cave at some point. Yuan Yinglong had been here for a long time, and he had gone to the 3rd level, the 4th level, and even the 5th level before. As such, he recognized most of the people here, and he introduced them to the others one by one. This time, at least half of the people ranked in the top 100 on the recent leaderboard of the 2nd level had come. The highest ranked person was 7th, and it was someone called Gang Xiandan. He had already been in the 2nd level for over 7 trillion years, and he had already refined his 1st tier, cultivation, to a pinnacle level. In terms of battle prowess alone, he could certainly compete for the top spot. There were also powerful elites from the 3rd and 4th level, and even if their cultivation was suppressed, their strength was still not to be belittled. However, Ling Han was fearless. Even if their cultivation weren't suppressed, he still wouldn't be afraid of 3rd tier heavenly venerates, let alone in the current situation. "I'll check out the situation," he said as he strode forward, becoming the first person to walk to the source of the waterfall. This was a humongous cavity in the side of the mountain from which countless broken shards of worlds could funnel out without any obstruction. This was evidence of just how gigantic this cave was. Upon seeing Ling Han fly in, many people scoffed in disdain, feeling like Ling Han was overestimating his own strength. So many elites had already tried, yet he was still unwilling to back down. He was merely trying to show off. Who is this person? He thinks far too highly of himself, no? Oh, I think you're underestimating this person. How so? Are you trying to tell me that he's some famous and impressive person? Ling Han heard of him before. Don't tell me he's that Ling Han from the 1st level? That's right, he's already become a heavenly venerate, so he's gone to the 2nd level. So it's him. However, so what if it's him? Even 2nd tier heavenly venerates will be crushed to death in that place, and we've all had our cultivation suppressed as well. Even 3rd tier heavenly venerates have no option but to wait until that pressure disappears. He's young and full of vigor, so he naturally wants to achieve that which others can't. He just wants to win some renown. Does he truly believe that he can rival Wu Haoyang? Many people shook their heads. Ling Han had already fallen behind the other top-level prodigies, with Lin Yulian, Wu Haoyang, and Xan Chihu all being 5th tier heavenly venerates now. Meanwhile, Ling Han had only just advanced to the 1st tier. How could he compare? Ling Han flew above the waterfall, and after entering the mountain, the waterfall had already become a river. This was a river even wider than a sea, its breadth so great that one couldn't see its edges. Even with his vision as a heavenly venerate, he could only just make out the mountain walls on the 2 sides. After a short while, Ling Han felt a tremendous pressure surge over him, obstructing his advance. This force had already reached the pinnacle level of the 1st tier. Thus, the vast majority of 1st tier heavenly venerates who arrived here could only look on and sigh, unable to advance any further. If they stubbornly pushed forward, they would likely be mercilessly crushed into pieces. However, Ling Han remained calm and unfazed, with the boundless power of dimensions surging through his body and allowing him to advance as if he were walking over flat ground. His speed wasn't affected at all. As Ling Han continued to advance, the pressure crushing down on him also continued to increase. This place was where the 4th spatial level and the 2nd spatial level had overlapped all those years ago. Thus, there were many places that were filled with the power of heaven and earth of the 4th level, a power that targeted 3rd tier heavenly venerates. This pressure far exceeded that which targeted those at the 1st tier. Normally speaking, this was something that couldn't be overcome. When 3rd tier elites came here, their cultivation level would also be suppressed back to the 1st tier. That being the case, how could they overcome 3rd tier obstacles? This was unless 6th tier or even 7th tier heavenly venerates came over to help. They would indeed be able to resist the pressure of heaven and earth and forcefully overcome this barrier. However, Ling Han's power came from within, so he was naturally also an exception to this rule. He continued to advance, and after 7 days, he saw the true origin of the black waterfall. What appeared before him was a colossal lake that had a crack in the corner. It was the water flowing from this crack that formed the humongous black waterfall. This was simply inconceivable. Just how large was the black waterfall? Yet it was actually formed by water flowing from a crack in a lake. Ling Han hovered above the lake, and he felt like there was a boundless, murderous aura surging up into the sky, causing even him to feel some pressure. This was the aura of third-tier heavenly venerates. During that past event, the corpses of countless elites had been buried beneath this lake, right? Ling Han descended, wanting to enter the lake. However, he quickly stopped in his tracks. The water pressure was far too devastating. He could rival those at the third tier, and he could, in fact, even defeat most of those at the third tier. However, just how many third-tier heavenly venerates had been buried under this lake? Even if they had already lost most of their power, their quantity still more than made up for it once combined. With tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of them, the murderous aura that they created indeed wasn't something that third-tier heavenly venerates could withstand. Ling Han had no option but to retreat. He stood above the lake and continued to observe. Several days later, waves suddenly rippled across the surface of the lake. Boom! This wave was far too large, and it reached hundreds of thousands of meters in height in just an instant, violent as it crashed through the lake. Ling Han was forced to retreat. Otherwise, if he were struck by this wave, it would be equivalent to facing a combined strike from hundreds or even thousands of third-tier heavenly venerates. Even as powerful as he would still be smashed out of shape. The lake became tumultuous, with boundless ferocious waves crashing back and forth. No waves would exist without wind. Why had the calm lake suddenly become tumultuous? Ling Han carefully observed the situation. When the waves finally calmed down, a golden glow suddenly shimmered at the bottom of the lake. It was a symbol. Ling Han focused his gaze, yet he immediately shook his head. The lake still had yet to fully calm down, and this caused the golden symbol to distort and waver, making it extremely hard to decipher. Moreover, he had a feeling that this symbol was being blocked by something, with only a third of it revealed. A heavenly venerable seal. Ling Han was certain about this. Even though it was extremely fuzzy, its reflection in his mind still made him feel like his communication with the power of heaven and earth had sped up a little. Sure enough, there were genuinely heavenly venerable seals in this place. Ling Han hesitated at this moment. Should he bring the Empress and the others over? However, he immediately shook his head. The pressure here was far too great, so one would at least need to be at the third tier to withstand it. Thus, what would it matter even if he brought them over? He continued to observe the heavenly venerable seal, aiming to comprehend and master it. However, it was a shame that the symbol was not only fuzzy, but also disappeared soon after. After remaining here for half a year, Ling Han finally managed to decipher a pattern. Only after the lake became tumultuous would the symbol materialize and remain for approximately an hour. However, there was no set time for the lake to become tumultuous. Sometimes it would only take a single day, while at other times it would remain calm for more than a dozen days. After another half a year, Ling Han decided to leave this place first. This was because he had already mostly comprehended this symbol. He had already seen and comprehended all that there was to see and comprehend without entering the depths of the lake. Chapter 2784. 2784 Enter. Chapter 2784. 2784 Enter. 2784 Enter. Ling Han returned to the path from which he came. He had followed the river flow and appeared at the mouth at mid-mountain only a few days later. When they saw Ling Han appear, it was natural that there would be a new wave of whispering again. Had he fled because he could no longer hold up? However, he lasted for over a year inside. This is no ordinary feat. Hey, Do you really believe that he has entered the depths of the space? If you ask me, he must have just been stalled for over a year in the outer area, yet tries to make others think that he has continued the journey so that he could shock us. That would really be too shameless. No one believed that Ling Han had been able to make it all the way to the source of the waterfall. That was too unrealistic. Not even a third-tier heavenly venerate would be able to do so. Ling Han did not pay them any regard at all. He came and stood in front of Lu Shishuang and the others. How was it? The Rain Emperor asked. Ling Han told them briefly about the situation and made everyone's heart itch. They, too, wanted to go and take a look at that seal. Unfortunately, the terrifying pressure had still not dispersed. If they entered now, that would be equivalent to committing suicide. Unlike the others, Yuan Yinglong did not have that much confidence in Ling Han. As he saw it, there was no way that anyone that had not reached third tier could enter. Moreover, it had to be a third tier without his cultivation level suppressed. Hence, even if Ling Han really was a third-tier heavenly venerate, there was still no way he could succeed. He had to be babbling nonsense. Yuan Yinglong shook his head mentally. Ling Han was only saying this to garner attention, and the reason why he dared to speak such nonsense was because there was no one at all that could enter. Sigh, but the pressure here would still eventually disperse. By then, when everyone entered, they would realize that Ling Han was just babbling nonsense. What was the point of all this then? Yuan Yinglong did not speak out about this. After all, Ling Han was much stronger than him. The former had to give him some face. Everyone waited. At present, no one could do anything anyways. More and more people came. There were third tier, second tier, and first tier heavenly venerates. There were also followers that were pseudo-heavenly venerable tiers and ninth heaven celestial king tiers, and the place became extremely lively. No conflicts erupted among them. They all sat there quietly. At present, there was no conflict of interest among them. But should the pressure here disappear, and they become able to enter into the mystery realm, it would be a different story. Everyone was very patient. In any case, they could still cultivate here, though the efficiency would be slightly lowered. Ling Han had already started using his newly obtained seal. He realized that the efficiency of his communication with the heaven and earth had slightly improved again, but it was only an increase from 32 to 34 times. This seemingly was not a great improvement, but it should be known that this was only a blurry seal. If he could obtain a complete one, the increase in effectiveness would become even more apparent. Ling Han tried to immerse the heavenly venerable seal in battle. He discovered that every single heavenly venerable seal had to be charged so that it would glow first before it could be used. And in the process of using it, the seal would be releasing energy. When the heavenly venerable seal dimmed down completely, it could no longer be used, and it had to be charged again. Heavenly venerable seals could be used in conjunction with heavenly venerate techniques, compounding the might of a technique. Unfortunately, heavenly venerable seals could not be used simultaneously. If they were used simultaneously, the might would not increase either. It would only speed up the process of releasing energy. However, even so, the more heavenly venerable seals one had mastered, the more apparent the increase to one's battle prowess. That was because the process of releasing energy lasted only 2 hours. Thus, the more heavenly venerable seals one mastered, the more one would be able to maintain his battle prowess at a high point. Furthermore, different heavenly venerable seals would have different levels of boosting one's battle prowess. Ling Han had tested it out. Among the 8 seals inside his body, the 7 seals that he had obtained through the divine demon sword could only increase his battle prowess by around 10 times. But that incomplete seal could boost his battle prowess by up to 12 times. And this was when it was in an incomplete state. What if it was a complete seal? Ling Han's heart couldn't help but beat strongly. He definitely had to complete this seal. As time passed, everyone realized that the pressure here was slowly subsiding. Going by the look of things, the pressure would completely disappear in less than a year, someone estimated. As expected, after half a year, someone took the risk of entering and discovered that, as compared to previously, the distance that they could venture in had greatly increased. Everyone scrambled over each other to get in, fearing that the pressure would suddenly disappear and someone else would become first to snatch the opportunity. They traveled alongside the river flow, leaping from one spot to the next. Yuan Yinglong shockingly discovered that the situation here was just as Ling Han had described. Could it be that what Ling Han had previously said was all true? Yuan Yinglong immediately shook his head. No, no, no. Ling Han was very strong. Perhaps he had indeed come here, so it was natural that he could outline the situation. But if they went further, Ling Han's deceptions would definitely be exposed. After traveling about 2/3 of the way, they stopped. The pressure was still there ahead of them. Another half-year later, they continued further, and then encountered pressure again. They stopped once more. With them repeatedly stopping and continuing like this, the Great Lake was finally within their sight about 3 years later. We've reached the source. Everyone was excited. Yuan Yinglong and his lackeys were all numb with shock. That was because everything was just like how Ling Han had described. It was like he really had come here before. Was this possible? Thinking about how terrifying the pressure here had once been, and that Ling Han could still walk freely and leisurely like he was walking on flat land, they wondered, was he really a first-tier heavenly venerate? Was he not a sixth-tier heavenly venerate in disguise by any chance? The gazes they directed at Ling Han involuntarily became reverent. Originally, they had only thought that Ling Han had been stronger than them, but they had not had any idea exactly how strong he had been. However, now they knew that he was at a height that they could only look up at. Several days later, ripples appeared on the surface of the lake, giving rise to terrifying, boundless waves, and everyone inhaled sharply. If struck by these waves, even a third-tier heavenly venerate could be smashed into a mush of flesh and blood. But after the waves passed, golden light flickered on the surface of the lake, turning into an incomplete, blurred seal. Yet everyone became excited by this. Heavenly Venerable Seal. They were all keen. Once the pressure here subsided, they would dive down to the bottom of the lake, find that Heavenly Venerable Seal, and take this astronomical good fortune alone. Though things could not be clearly seen from such a great distance, they could still experience some slight bit of the profound power here. Thus, everyone observed, if they could only just grasp a tiny bit, their battle prowess and rate of cultivation could be slightly increased. Ling Han stood, arms crossed behind his back. He had long since learned this incomplete, blurry, heavenly venerable seal. Furthermore, because of the distance, the seal he could see was slightly more complete. He stood guard over the Empress and the others so that they would not be disturbed while they were in the process of comprehension. Once every few days, the pressure here would decrease slightly. Thus, everyone would be able to take a step forwards, getting nearer and nearer to the lake. They would also be able to see the heavenly venerable seal clearer and clearer. Finally, after another 3 months, the pressure here disappeared completely. Everyone was overjoyed. Some immediately leaped into the lake and dived to the bottom to find the heavenly venerable seal. Once this seal truly came into existence, the time that it could exist would be extremely limited. It would rapidly disappear. Hence, anyone who wanted to obtain it would have to do so immediately and as soon as possible. At least, they could not be left behind by anyone else. In only a short while, those who had dived to the bottom of the lake all appeared. Every single one of them was bloodied and looked extremely miserable. The pressure inside the lake had not vanished. They couldn't dive very deep, so they could only come back to the surface. It would only be this place that could cause such misery to heavenly venerates. Chapter 2785. 2785 Fourth Tier also arrives. Chapter 2785. 2785 Fourth Tier also arrives. 2785 Fourth Tier also arrives. Quite a few groups returned in defeat. Naturally, no one else dared to descend into the lake again. These people did not just include the top 100 of the recent leaderboard of the second level, but also supreme elites from the third and fourth level. Any single one of them was a powerful figure that could suppress the world and make even heaven and earth pale. But here, all of them could only act in accordance with the rules. The power of a transcendent dimension was really too strong. Over a dozen days later, a wave suddenly rose up in the lake, and the wave this time was more frightening than any previous wave. It was 3,000 kilometers tall. It was like the whole world was pounding straight towards the crowd, causing everyone's expression to change drastically. If they were struck by this, even a heavenly venerate would be done for. Boom, boom, boom. In accompaniment with this giant wave, there was also rumbling from the ground, as if an earthquake was happening. However, anyone who was a heavenly venerate could feel the changes in space. This was not regulations of space, but rather a change in space that would only happen when the dimension was being compressed. Everyone was both shocked and overjoyed. That was because the collision between two transcendent dimensions was too terrifying, and who knew how terrifyingly dangerous it would be. But change also meant opportunity. Who knew? Perhaps that heavenly venerable seal would truly come into being. After a long while, the wave finally weakened and faded. However, a massive whirlpool appeared in the waters. Right at the very center, there was a pit. Its depth was unknown, and it was dark and eerie, striking fear into anyone who chanced to gaze at it. Yeah. A considerable number of heavenly venerates suddenly showed hints of surprise. Upon closer look, one would realize that they were all third-tier heavenly venerates that came from the fourth spatial level. Only one person was the exception, and that was Ling Han. They all sensed that a number of powerful auras were presently flying out from the bottom of the lake. It could not be helped. Even if their cultivation level was suppressed, a third-tier heavenly venerate would definitely be stronger in various areas than any second-tier or first-tier heavenly venerate, but the extent of their strength would be limited. Only a while later, second-tier heavenly venerates also sensed it, which was then followed by first-tier heavenly venerates, and finally even pseudo-heavenly venerates and ninth heaven celestial kings could sense it. But right at this moment, over a dozen figures shot out from the center of the whirlpool. They were all extremely colossal, and their similarity was that they had particularly many legs, arms, eyes, and heads. However, every single monster was covered with wounds, which were still gushing out blood. These were creatures created by hysteria. Ling Han's eyes narrowed, judging by the aura exuding from these monsters. It was clear that they had already existed for countless years. They were not like the newbies that assaulted cities every time and had extremely weak auras of age. Could it be that these were hysteria's troops that had not died when space had been previously folded? There are just over a dozen lingering dregs, a heavenly venerate said disdainfully. He was a great elite from the fourth level, and rushed forwards to fight them immediately. With him leading the way, the others would naturally not sit idly by, and they all surged towards these monsters. Usually it would be Hysteria's army that would be bullying them with an advantage in numbers, but now the situation was completely reversed. These over a dozen monsters were being ganged up on by several thousand heavenly venerates, and they were destroyed very soon. This place suppressed one's cultivation level, so they were all first-tier heavenly venerates. The advantage in numbers was too important. They are all at the third tier. After the battle ended, everyone analyzed the condition of these monsters. When space folded all those years ago, they had been left here. After a good number of epochs, they have also developed their own intelligence. If it were not for the advantage in numbers, they would not have been so easily dealt with. Thankfully, there is suppression from the power of dimension. They are small in number, after all, so they would not cause too much impact. Still, to think that there are actually dregs of Hysteria's troops still alive here, this is truly unimaginable. These monsters could come out so does that mean that we can go down as well? Everyone was making their guesses, because these monsters could come from the bottom of the lake alive, though they were severely wounded. Then the crowd, too, should be able to go down. Immediately, quite a number of people leaped out and dived down the pit in the center of the lake. There was no pressure from the lake waters here, so they naturally would not have to suffer that terrifying pressure. Otherwise, those soldiers of hysteria from before would not have been able to appear either. "Let's hurry too," one of Yuan Inglong's lackeys said. This was a heavenly venerable seal. It was too valuable. Ling Han waved a hand dismissively. "Don't be impatient." He felt that this whirlpool was not stable. What if people dived under, and then the lake waters suddenly poured over them? That would be equivalent to countless third-tier heavenly venerates attacking them all at once. And who would be able to withstand that? Yuan Inglong nodded as well. Don't be rash. Most people had suppressed their greed. While one had to be brave to contend for treasures in an ancient site, to simply rush in without any reservations was not courage, but rather recklessness. Some spoke up to warn them, but a great many people still stayed stubborn and did not heed these warnings. As they saw it, this was a great opportunity that belonged to them, and definitely could not be missed. If they fell even one step behind, the heavenly venerable seal might be obtained by another. They dived in, and very soon disappeared from the range of everyone's senses. In only 15 minutes, the ground started to tremble fiercely again. Boom! A massive wave rose, and great amounts of lake water gushed into the whirlpool. Everyone's expression changed drastically. With so much lake water gushing downwards, this was equivalent to having over 100 third-tier heavenly venerates attacking at the same time. Just how many first-tier heavenly venerates were needed to be able to withstand that? At the very least, those people inside the lake were not enough. They were done for. In this little bit of time, they definitely could not have reached the bottom of the lake. Then, without any place where they could hide, their only fate would be death. Everyone shook their head. Even a third-tier heavenly venerate was helpless. To say nothing of the fact that their power was suppressed in this place. Even if they could use their full power, they would only be able to ensure their own safety when faced with this kind of attack. How would they be able to save others? It could not be helped. This was also what those people asked for. Everyone waited patiently, and the pit in the middle of the whirlpool gradually grew in size a while later. The water level of the lake also began to diminish. Furthermore, it was at a very high speed at that. This space was again compressed and collided, and the terrain was changed again. The bottom of the lake should have cracked. In fact, it might even be connected to another dimension, and that was why the lake water had been extracted. The water level was rapidly falling, and everyone could also feel that the pressure in the lake waters was quickly decreasing. The contest was about to begin. Wong, wong, wong. A few more figures shot over from a distance and landed on the banks of the lake. They looked to vary in age, but they all exuded a great aura that could suppress the heaven and earth. Gasp! These are the great elites of the 5th level. 4th tier heavenly venerates. Quite a number of people immediately exclaimed in shock. They had not thought that even 4th tier heavenly venerates would be alerted. Thankfully, there was suppression of cultivation levels here. Even a 4th tier would only have the battle prowess of a 1st tier, so this was still a fair competition. Shan Fei Wu Feng Hilikun. Yuan Inglong had visited the 5th spatial level before. He recognized at least half of these 4th tier heavenly venerates. Ling Han was slightly startled. Hilikun? Wasn't that He Yufeng's old man? Previously, just because he had broken through to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier, and because he had an old man at the 4th tier, He Yufeng had publicly bullied Ling Han in the martial academy. Afterwards, Ling Han's strength had greatly increased, and he turned around to thrash He Yufeng severely as payback. But this garnered the resentment from Hilikun, and he even refused to approve his application for indefinite leave. He was extremely petty, and now, Ling Han finally saw the man himself. A smile slowly appeared at the corners of Ling Han's lips. This place suppressed one's cultivation level. So could this be considered as He Kun delivering himself straight to Ling Han's doorstep? Chapter 2786. 2786, even fourth tier would be beaten. Chapter 2786. 2786, even fourth tier would be beaten. 2786, even fourth tier would be beaten. The fourth tier, heavenly venerates, had arrived, but none of them spoke. In their eyes, everyone here was nothing but trash unworthy of their second glance. With every difference in tier among heavenly venerates, the gap was as great a disparity as between the heaven and the earth. They had qualifications to be so arrogant. This kind of atmosphere was quite stifling. In front of fourth tier heavenly venerates, even the third tier elites seemed very tense. After all, it would be impossible for everyone to stay in the realm battlefield for the rest of their lives, so who could not take the suppression by a fourth tier seriously? The strong needed to be revered, and this was a reality that would never change for eternity. Everyone stepped aside one after another, staying away from those fourth tier heavenly venerates, as if to show them respect with such a gesture. In fact, this kind of hierarchy had always been very clearly defined. Before the arrival of these fourth tier heavenly venerates, the third tier heavenly venerates had dominance, while the second tiers had to show them respect, and the first tiers similarly also had to respect the second tiers. Certainly, it was guaranteed that no one would show any mercy if a heavenly venerable seal appeared and had to be fought over. That would have been a completely different matter. However, at this moment, a young man was seen walking slowly, heading straight for a fourth tier heavenly venerate He Kun. What does this guy want to do? He is probably going to bootlick the fourth tier heavenly venerate. Otherwise, what's he going to do? He can't be going there to provoke him, right? That's not right. That person is Ling Han. So what if it's Ling Han? This person is quite capable of stirring trouble. When they saw that this person was Ling Han, many people revealed strange expressions. They had all heard of Ling Han's story and knew that this person had a bad temper and stubborn personality. In addition, he was the most prodigious talent who had been Wu Haoyang's equal all those years ago. As for him bootlicking a fourth tier heavenly venerate, who would believe it? Hey, what does he want to do? Yuan Yinglong was also feeling anxious. He naturally wouldn't stop Ling Han from taking a casual walk, but the latter was actually walking straight towards a fourth tier heavenly venerate. What kind of trouble was he thinking to cause? This was a fourth tier heavenly venerate who could kill a first tier with just a single breath. Despite there being suppression of cultivation levels here, the higher one's cultivation level, the greater the advantage one would have. Moreover, a first tier provoking a fourth tier would have been wrong no matter where it was. The Empress and the others all had calm expressions. They knew Ling Han too well. Once this guy made up his mind to do something, who would be able to dissuade him? Not doing anything. He's probably just going to spar with He Kun. Ling Jinxue smiled. The corners of Yuan Yinglong's mouth twitched. To spar with a fourth tier heavenly venerate? You must be mad. Even though you are incomparably freakish, a fourth tier heavenly venerate would very likely have mastered more heavenly venerable seals. This was power accumulated over time, and it was by no means something that a first tier heavenly venerate could compare with. Besides, wouldn't you consider how being targeted by a fourth tier heavenly venerate would make you suffer when you went back to the normal world? Those lackeys of his also revealed ugly expressions and wanted nothing more than to hide far away, drawing a clear line between themselves and Ling Han and his group. When Ling Han passed by everyone and entered into He Kun's territory, he finally captured everyone's attention. This person, what does he want to do? Even some fourth tier heavenly venerates glanced over and were sizing up Ling Han. He Kun also cast a few extra glances at Ling Han. In the first place, he looked down on the rest of the world in disdain, and didn't take any of the second tier or third tier heavenly venerates here seriously, and even more so, completely disregarded the first tier. However, when he saw Ling Han's appearance, clearly his eyes narrowed slightly. Ling Han! Killing intent immediately flared up in his heart. This brazen man actually dared to bully his son, which greatly displeased him. However, he also needed to thank this young man. It was precisely due to his provocation that He Yufeng had advanced to become a second-tier heavenly venerate. He hesitated. Should he leave Ling Han to be dealt with by his son, or should he beat him up first to vent his anger? Don't say anything, let's fight. Ling Han raised his fists and charged forwards. What was going on? Seeing this scene, everyone was dumbfounded. Fuck, it really was a fight. He Kun also didn't expect that Ling Han would dare to attack him. Was a first tier taking the initiative to challenge a fourth tier because he had fried his brains? If it was on the fifth spatial level, no need for it to be on the fifth spatial level. Even if it was only on the fourth or third spatial level, he, Kun, could suppress Ling Han with just a wave of his hand. But this was the second spatial level. He only had the power of a first tier heavenly venerate. At most, it would only be a peak stage first tier heavenly venerate. So how could he possibly dare to underestimate Ling Han? He quickly made his move and parried Ling Han's strike. Pung! However, his defense was useless against Ling Han. With a single punch, Ling Han hit He Kun directly in the face, causing his nose to bleed profusely, and sent him flying. Pung, pang, pang! Ling Han caught up, swinging his fists like a violent storm. So what if He Kun was a fourth tier? Here, Ling Han could pat his chest with assurance and say that even if a fifth-tier heavenly venerate was to come, he would also need to address Ling Han as Big Brother. Everyone was dumbstruck as they watched He Kun being thrashed by Ling Han as if he was a sandbag, completely powerless to fight back. Was this really a first tier fighting against a fourth tier? Many people felt the urge to rub their eyes, wanting to confirm whether this was true. Even if cultivation level was being suppressed here, a fourth tier would only be slightly stronger than an ordinary first tier heavenly venerate. It should be noted that this was still above the first tier, so how could he be beaten up like a sandbag by Ling Han, completely powerless to fight back? Yuan Yinglung's face became even paler with fright. He swore that he had to draw a clear dividing line between himself and Ling Han upon returning this time. Otherwise, when He Kun returned to exact revenge, he might also be implicated. How humiliating it had to be for a fourth-tier heavenly venerate to be violently beaten up by a first tier in public. If He Kun didn't exact revenge for this, he would also be too embarrassed to call himself fourth tier. In fact, even if he took revenge, such humiliation would definitely not be erased as well. Everyone had only one thought. Ling Han was indeed too outrageously bold. Why would he deeply offend a fourth-tier heavenly venerate? Could it be that he would be able to kill him here? However, it had to be admitted that Ling Han's strength was very impressive indeed. He should be the strongest at the first tier. As expected of a guy who has achieved great military merits on the first spatial level. At first, I thought the rumors were exaggerated, but now it seems that this person really has actual abilities. Everyone was feeling rueful. Pung! Ling Han knocked He Kun to the ground with one punch, and then stepped on his chest with his right foot. Okay, now we can talk. He Kun was so angry that he vomited blood. He was still thinking whether to beat up Ling Han first, and it turned out that he got beaten up severely by Ling Han first instead. He really had an impulse of wanting to die. In front of so many people, how could the dignified fourth-tier heavenly venerate withstand such humiliation? Young man, don't you think that you've gone overboard? A fourth-tier heavenly venerate said casually at this time. Ling Han glared at him. If you don't accept it, come and fight. Otherwise, stop your blabbering. That fourth-tier heavenly venerate was at a loss for words, and then his face flushed red, with him feeling a kind of urge to kill someone. "You brat, you are really too arrogant. You really don't take a fourth tier seriously." But thinking about it, there was not much difference between the man's strength and that of Hilakun. He was slightly stronger, but he had not reached the point of being able to suppress Hilakun. If he was to fight with Ling Han, it was to be reckoned that his fate would be the same as that of Hilakun. So what even if he could tear Ling Han to pieces after leaving here? Could such a humiliation be erased? Thus, he no longer uttered another word. Chapter 2787. 2787 Water Level Recedes. Chapter 2787. 2787 Water Level Recedes. 2787 Water Level Recedes. Everyone was dumbfounded again. A fourth tier was being stepped on by Ling Han, while another was rendered speechless. Ling Han really intended to defy the heavens. Of course, there was a restriction on all this. They had to be in the second spatial level. "Brat!" Hilakun gritted his teeth. His gaze darkened as if he was about to spit fire. "Still misbehaving?" "Pung! Pung! Pung!" Ling Han stomped his foot several times, causing Hilakun to groan agonizingly as the pain penetrated deep into his bones. Everyone sighed ruefully. Who else here was capable of being Ling Han's match? They looked at Gung Xiandan, who was an elite ranked 7th on the recent leaderboard on the second spatial level, and then at Chang Guangqi, who was a prodigy ranking 9th, as well as Shi Yuan, who was ranked 10th. There were also elites on the recent leaderboard of the 3rd and 4th spatial levels, many of whom were ranked within the top 500. The eyes of these people flickered as they were inwardly calculating the probability of winning in battle against Ling Han. With the suppression of power, the possibility of them winning was less than 10%. In a battle of equal level, there was only a 10% chance of winning, and they were already elites listed on the recent leaderboard. Upon comparison, Ling Han's formidable strength stood out remarkably. "Are you going to behave now?" Ling Han lowered his head and looked towards Hilakun. Hilakun gritted his teeth and remained silent. He was a 4th tier, heavenly venerate, so how could he not even have this much of a backbone? As a person, he could be defeated, but couldn't show any weakness and couldn't lose his dignity. Once they got out, he would make Ling Han know the meaning of regret. "If you continue to misbehave, then you will be beaten until you do behave." Ling Han started hitting him again. He was indifferent since he wasn't the one who was getting beaten anyway. Hilakun was in misery. Soon he was being hit until he was riddled with injuries. However, a heavenly venerate's self-healing ability was indeed powerful. Even though he was not specialized in defense, a 4th tier heavenly venerate was so much more powerful than a 1st tier, and his self-healing ability was of course stronger as well. He was continuously hit until he was severely wounded, and then speedily recovered. The same cycle repeated again and again, causing him to feel like this was a fate that was worse than death. "This brat has a bit of the same graceful and charming demeanor as myself back then." The black donkey stood up, his face filled with admiration. "You are merely at the 1st tier, so what do you mean by back then?" The big black dog exposed him mercilessly. "This brat took after me. I have endured all sorts of hardships to raise him." Yuan Inglong felt dizzy, his feet were wobbly, and he couldn't stand steadily. He was scared indeed. He had originally thought that he had found a powerful helper, but it turned out the latter was a supreme bringer of misfortune. Hilakun was stubborn and refused to beg for mercy. This was his bottom line. If he begged for mercy in public, he would no longer be able to face others in the future. Since Ling Han had free time, he kept thrashing Hilakun while waiting for the water level to drop. No one persuaded him anymore. Firstly, they were no match for Ling Han, and secondly, they didn't have any friendly relations with Hilakun. So why should they bother to embarrass themselves? For days passed in this manner, and the water level had dropped out of sight. Everyone jumped into the lake, which now had become a huge pit, one after another. Ling Han also sent Helikun flying with a kick. He couldn't kill him, or he wouldn't be able to return to the realm battlefield in the future. He wasn't afraid that Helikun would take revenge on him. In the second spatial level, he was invincible. Furthermore, he wouldn't be trapped there forever. When he advanced to the second tier, battling a fourth tier would definitely not be a problem. Let's go! Ling Han nodded towards the Empress and the others. One by one, they jumped into what was initially a lake and moved downward swiftly. Boss, what should we do? Depend Radiance asked. Yuan Yinglong gritted his teeth. We have already gotten in too deep and we can't withdraw now, so we will follow Ling Han this time. Once we leave, we will find a way to draw a clear dividing line. Yes. Depend Radiance and the others nodded. Ling Han took the lead and stepped on the walls of the lake. With a burst of strength, he was moving at lightning speed. Only half a day later, everyone arrived once again at the surface of the lake. The lake hadn't been drained, and by this time the whirlpool had already disappeared and the water level had stopped falling. However, one could already see the bottom of the lake here, and it was no more than 30,000 meters or so, and such a distance was nothing to a heavenly venerate. Therefore, some people were eager to give it a try. It was only 30,000 meters or so it would be impossible for the water pressure to reach an unbearable level, right? Let's go! Splash, splash! Several people had immediately dived towards the bottom of the lake, and among them were several fourth-tier heavenly venerates. Ling Han and the Empress looked at each other, and similarly jumped into the lake. They possessed strength beyond the first tier, and were capable of conquering all opposition in this place. After entering the lake, Ling Han and the Empress immediately felt the incoming pressure, but they each formed a defensive shield around themselves to keep the water pressure out. Now the pressure wasn't a big deal to them. The others also jumped into the lake one by one, and everyone's strength could now be seen clearly. Some people were no longer able to bear it after diving down to about 3,000 meters. Their shields shattered, and the skin of their entire bodies instantly ruptured under the pressure of the water, staining the surrounding waters with blood. They had no choice but to float upwards, or they would be seeking death for themselves. There were some people who could reach 6,000 meters deep before they had to float upwards, while some managed to hold on until 9,000 meters. This was the most direct display of one's physical might. When the depth had reached 15,000 meters, there were less than 100 people left. On Ling Han's side, other than the karmic life, heavenly venerable, and Rain Emperor, the others had long since been unable to last any longer. Moreover, the karmic life, heavenly venerable, and Rain Emperor were also finding it unbearable, and their shields were on the verge of collapse. However, at this point, one could see the heavenly venerable seal below more clearly, although it was not more exposed, owing to the fact that there were no longer any undulations in the lake waters. The refractive index was reduced, and one could naturally see it even more vividly. These two people stopped here, studying this particular seal. Ling Han and the Empress continued on heading downwards. They were still very far from reaching their limit. 18,000 meters, 21,000 meters, and to Ling Han's surprise, there were still other people at this depth. Those comprised Gang Xiandan, Chang Guangqi, Shi Yuan, Shi Zhanghe, Shi Mingyu, and some others, who were all high-ranking figures on the recent leaderboard of each spatial level. But on the contrary, those several bigwigs of the fifth spatial level were nowhere to be seen. Here, where one's cultivation level was being suppressed, surviving would depend on one's capability in a battle of equal levels, and it was by no means the case that the higher one's cultivation level, the stronger one would be in this situation. Take Ling Han, the Empress, Gang Xiandan, and the others, for example. These people had always maintained a low profile, and it was only now that their strength, which surpassed the first tier, had erupted. However, they were also extremely surprised, as they didn't expect that there were actually so many people like themselves. They cast a glance at each other and continued diving further downwards. What Ling Han saw was everyone displaying their unique abilities. Most of them were being wrapped by blurry seals, resisting the pressure of the lake water. There were also a few who, like Ling Han and the Empress, were exceptionally calm. In the same way, they merely formed a shield and resisted the pressure using their own power. Those who had manifested the seals obviously had mastered heavenly venerable seals. Furthermore, they weren't the most widely known 7 heavenly venerable seals, but rather were seals obtained from other channels and were more powerful and supported them in their journey here. But what Ling Han cared more about were those people who didn't manifest any seals. They could come this far without heavenly venerable seals. Why was this so? Ling Han looked at the Empress, and the latter nodded towards Ling Han. Perhaps these people had also mastered the unique power of several dimensions, or there was no other way to explain it. The Empress, whose evolution index was about 11, could accommodate the power of 100 dimensions. Even without Wally's theory and Ling Han's assistance, the difficulty of this wasn't so high that it couldn't be replicated. Chapter 2788. 2788 Crevice in the Ground. Chapter 2788. 2788 Crevice in the Ground. 2788 Crevice in the Ground. 24,000 meters, 27,000 meters. When they got here, several more people were eliminated from the race, leaving only Gang Xiandan, Shi Zhanghe, Shi Mingyu, Ling Han, and the Empress. Gang Xiandan, Shi Zhanghe, and Shi Mingyu also looked at Ling Han and the Empress in surprise. These 2 people actually hadn't used any heavenly venerable seals so far. Both were entirely supported by their own power. It would seem that they were just like them too. Then let us see who will be able to last till the end. Everyone continued to dive, but the pressure was great indeed in the last 3,000 meters. Not only had it reached the second tier, it was at its late or even peak stage. So much so that the Empress had to channel the heavenly venerable seal to resist this formidable pressure. There was no way about it, as the Empress was only at the early stage of the first tier, and it would be impossible for her to contend against someone with the battle prowess of late-stage second tier without using a secret technique. It was not only the Empress. Gang Xiandan, Shi Zhanghe, and Shi Mingyu had also channeled heavenly venerable seals. Otherwise, they would not be able to withstand such pressure. It was important to note that Gang Xiandan, Shi Zhanghe, and others had been here for many years, and their cultivation level had to be at the peak stage. Based on such a comparison, it could be seen that the power of dimension that they could accommodate wasn't much more than the Empress. They finally fell onto the bed of the lake. Upon observation, there was nothing here but ruins, with traces of the aftermath of battle all over the place. There were a lot of corpses here, as big as a mountain and lying horizontally, and people couldn't see past them at all. Some were the size of ordinary people, but the aura which they emitted wasn't weak at all, causing one's heart to throb with trepidation. These were the corpses of third-tier heavenly venerates. After countless years, their bodies hadn't rotted at all, and it was like they had just died, with the wounds on their bodies still having traces of blood. What about the heavenly venerable seal? They searched everywhere, but there was no trace of the heavenly venerable seal anywhere. It could be seen from the surface of the lake before, so why couldn't it be found anywhere now? The heavenly venerable seal isn't something that can be seen at all times, but will only be seen after the waves rise up on the lake, so we'll have to wait for a little longer and see, Ling Han said to the Empress. The Empress nodded. Indeed, the appearance of this heavenly venerable seal required certain conditions to be met. They waited, but no one could keep channeling the heavenly venerable seals for a long time, so Ling Han asked the Empress to head ashore first. After the Empress left, Gang Xiandan and the others followed suit, as it was pointless to stubbornly persist. Ling Han was still walking about at the bottom of the lake. Firstly, he wanted to examine it in detail, and secondly, it was to find out if there were any heavenly venerate tools. Years ago, there were many third-tier heavenly venerates here, and it wouldn't be strange at all for them to possess heavenly venerate tools. Ling Han kept searching, But heavenly venerate tools cultivated by the third tier heavenly venerates had naturally developed consciousness, and once the owner had died, they would leave by themselves, perhaps directly transforming into Tao, turning back to their original form, or waiting for a new owner to refine them again, to once again fight for another lifetime. There were also others that roamed around the world. One day, perhaps they might be capable of developing true intelligence and gaining a real life of their own. Therefore, unless a heavenly venerate tool had been blown up, it would be extremely difficult to find the existence of a heavenly venerate tool. However, the problem was that a third-tier heavenly venerate was not yet capable of destroying a heavenly venerate tool. This was something that could only be done by a sixth-tier heavenly venerate, at least. Ling Han was feeling regretful there, but had no idea that those people on the surface of the lake were about to go crazy. Was this guy really human? Other people had gone all out and could only sustain the pressure by channeling heavenly venerable seals. However, there were only a few heavenly venerable seals, so how long could they keep channeling these seals? But how long had Ling Han remained below? Moreover, he didn't even channel any heavenly venerable seals at all, yet he was able to do something that other people couldn't. Wouldn't others be shocked by this? Just how strong was this guy? After Ling Han made 2 turns, he found a crevice in the ground. This crevice in the ground was quite extraordinary. Despite the water pressure being so strong, there was no water seeping in. Ling Han wanted to go in, but found himself being hit with a strong pressure, which immediately slowed him down. After that, he felt as if he was proceeding in a muddy swamp and couldn't move another step forward. Could it be that below is the real tomb of the heavenly venerate? The heavenly venerable seal had also seeped out of this crevice in the ground, so it was incomplete, and coupled with the turbulence of the lake, it became blurred. Ling Han kept trying, wanting to enter the crevice in the ground, but every time he squeezed forward a bit more, the pressure would increase by a bit more. It was as if there were 10 third-tier heavenly venerates joining forces to stop him at the beginning, which was then increased to 15, 20, and 50, and even Ling Han couldn't hold on any longer. He shook his head and returned to the shore. What's wrong with you guys? Ling Han looked around and saw that most of the people stared at him with astonishment, as if he had turned into some kind of monster. Everyone was speechless. Do you know what you have done? He was so powerful it was unbelievable. Ling Han explained the situation, and everyone's face revealed their excitement. If they could get inside the crevice in the ground, then they might be able to obtain that heavenly venerable seal. Yuan Long and the others were also very excited. Although they had previously felt apprehensive, they could also see the benefits now. Ling Han cast a sweeping glance at them. He didn't hide such news from them, because he had promised Yuan Long that they would move together. But he had also seen the shortcomings of Yuan Long, which made Ling Han unwilling to associate with the other party. This would be the last time, and it could be regarded as repaying Yinglong's previous favor. At this moment, everyone would just have to wait. Another 10 days passed, and everyone noticed that there was a dazzling light soaring into the sky from the bottom of the lake. Thereafter, the water level began to drop again. It didn't take long for the lake to completely disappear, leaving no trace of the water. If you stood at the bottom of the lake and looked around, this would be just a huge plateau. Let's go. Everyone descended one after another, all wanting to seize the opportunity. Ling Han and the others also took action, jumping towards the bottom of the lake. There were a large number of third-tier heavenly venerate corpses here, and they had formed an astonishing pressure of supreme might. This wasn't power, but a kind of suppression upon divine sense. Therefore, other than third-tier heavenly venerates who would remain unaffected, whether it was first-tier or second-tier, they would certainly feel a kind of pressure. There was no need to speak about the pseudo-heavenly venerates or the ninth heaven celestial kings. They wouldn't be able to bear it at all. With a clear goal in mind, everyone headed towards the crevice and soon arrived at the destination. Ling Han leaned forward to take a look, and sure enough, The pressure around the crevice in the ground had disappeared. "Thank you." A voice was heard from behind him. Ling Han turned his head and saw that it was Gung Xiandan. "What is there to thank me for?" Ling Han asked. "Thank you for finding this entrance for me," Gung Xiandan said. Ling Han laughed out loud. "Do you think you can take advantage of me? Don't think that your battle prowess is superior to mine, just because you gained some upper hand before," Gung Xiandan said lightly, seemingly very confident. "I also offer my thanks." Another person appeared. Cheng Guangqi. Shua, a third figure, landed. It was Shi Yuan. Subsequently, more elites also came over, such as Shi Mingyu, Shi Zhanghe, and several elites from the 5th level. All of them were staring at Ling Han coldly. Even if they were not Ling Han's match in this special place, the Heavenly Venerable Seal was possibly right in front of their eyes, so who would possibly retreat and give it up? There's no need to start a conflict at this time, right? Shi Mingyu played mediator. In any case, when the Heavenly Venerable Seal has just come into being, everyone can try to study it. So why don't we work together? Chapter 2789. 2789 A Chance. Chapter 2789. 2789 A Chance. 2789 A Chance. Ling Han pondered for a moment, and then said, smilingly, "Sure." It was indeed like what Shi Mingyu said. When a Heavenly Venerable Seal came into existence, anyone could be taught, but once they learned it, it could only be passed on and could not be taught. The others did not have any disagreement, either. They hadn't seen the Heavenly Venerable Seal yet, after all, so there was naturally no need for them to rush to make a move. Everyone entered into the crevice. Though the pressure had lessened considerably, there was still some pressure. Those who were weaker couldn't pass through at all. The crevice was very thick. The further they advanced, the stronger the obstructive force became, but it was still within tolerable limits. After only 30 minutes, they had come to the end of the crevice. A massive space appeared ahead of them, and there were corpses lying everywhere, so many that one would feel numb at the sight. This was the true battlefield from all those years ago. The bodies here numbered in hundreds of thousands. There was an astonishing number of them. Everyone released their divine sense, and immediately proceeded to do a search, looking for the whereabouts of the Heavenly Venerable Seal. This place was frighteningly quiet and also shockingly huge, and adding all the bodies lying all around, there was an indescribably repressed atmosphere in this place. Ling Han's brow wrinkled slightly in a frown. Previously, Heavenly Venerable Tier monsters had charged out. Then, were they the only monsters that remained, or only a portion of them, and more could appear at any time? "Are you worried that there might be other surviving dregs of Hysteria's troops?" the Empress asked. Ling Han nodded. "It is possible that chaos will occur in the space here. If there really are any lingering dregs of Hysteria's troops, they will be having 3rd tier's battle prowess, so we can't let our guard down." Though Ling Han, too, had battle prowess at the 3rd tier, if he was ambushed in a moment of carelessness, perhaps he would really die. The Rain Emperor and the others all nodded. Among the people here, only Ling Han's battle prowess had reached the 3rd tier. The others would not be able to put up any kind of resistance at all. They walked on for a while, but aside from dead bodies, there were only more dead bodies here. There was no sign of the Heavenly Venerable Seal. "Where is the Heavenly Venerable Seal?" someone asked, slightly agitated. Boom! Someone moved, blasting apart the pile of bodies, wanting to see if this kind of seal could be buried beneath them. With someone taking the initiative, the others moved as well. Pung, pung, pung. Bodies flew everywhere in the air. The majority of them were Hysteria's troops, but there were also some that were the people that had sacrificed themselves for Flaming Frost Realm all those years ago, and they, too, were sent flying mercilessly. Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head. It was one thing for Hysteria's troops, but to treat even those who had sacrificed themselves for the Flaming Frost Realm like this, that was going a little too far. Furthermore, Ling Han called out loudly, "Stop! There may still be lingering dregs of Hysteria's troops here." However, no one listened to him. The Heavenly Venerable Seal was too important. Everyone wanted to be the first to get hold of it. Corpses were still flying everywhere, and Ling Han's expression involuntarily darkened. He would not allow these people to disrespect the remains of past heroes. Pum! Suddenly, a figure shot into the skies, exuding an aura of peerless dominance. This was not a corpse, nor was it one of the people that had entered here. Instead, it was a wolfman that was around 30 meters tall. It had grown-out arms and legs, but it still had the head of a wolf. However, there were over 100 tentacles growing out of its back, and the sight was terrifyingly creepy. One of Hysteria's creations, Ling Han immediately confirmed inwardly. Many arms, many legs, many eyes. The unique trait of Hysteria's creations was that they always had a great number of a particular organ, and this wolf-man was in line with this unique trait. However, within Hysteria's troops, wolves would be wolves. They would not become wolf-men, but now this was a wolf-man. Though his whole body was covered with fur, his eyes were still exuding the light of intelligence. With the kind of existences that heavenly venerates were, after they had left the control of Hysteria, it was very easy for them to develop their own intelligence. This wolf-man had buried himself under the pile of bodies all this while, and it wasn't right until someone had swept aside that pile of bodies that he finally shot out from beneath the corpses. Lingering dregs of Hysteria's troops. Kill! Everyone discovered his presence, and all of them moved, planning to kill this wolf-man. Wait! This wolf-man sent out a wave of divine sense. I have already gained intelligence, and am no longer under Hysteria's control. I am willing to fight alongside you against Hysteria. Humph! How could the words of monsters be believed? Shi Zhanghe sneered. He had already drawn a sword, which he slashed out madly at the wolfman. From his very first move, he was going all out. Not only did he use a Heavenly Venerate tool, he was also channeling a Heavenly Venerate technique at the same time, and boosted himself with Heavenly Venerable Seals while unleashing his battle prowess to the extreme, wanting to kill this wolf-man as quickly as possible. There was naturally no need to speak of any rules in a battle against one of Hysteria's dregs. All of them, Shi Mingyu, Gung Xiandan, and elites from the third level, Wang Xiangrong and Bailey Ge, charged, unleashing their full strength. Though that wolf-man was in the third tier, it could not be helped that power would be suppressed here, and he was at an absolute numerical disadvantage as well. So how could he hold up against the mad barrage of attacks from so many elites? Immediately, he was battered and exhausted. Pum! 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 Right at this moment, piles of corpses burst apart by themselves one after another, and elites successively streaked out from beneath them. Tiger men, lion men, birdmen, snake women, there were at least 100 of them, and they were all surviving dregs of Hysteria's troops. Hiss, there were so many of them. Everyone was taken aback. There was only a limited number of them that had entered here, no more than 20-odd. Merely in terms of numbers, they were overwhelmed by the other side. However, those like Gung Xiandan, Shi Zhanghe, and some others were still calm. They were all prodigies that could be considered invincible among those with equal cultivation level. They did not fear a disadvantage in number set, lest the 100-plus Heavenly Venerates here would not be enough to suppress them. Everyone stopped, and the wolf-man sighed in relief and repeated, "Every word I have said just now is true. Though we are Hysteria's creations, we are only its tools for war at the same time, easily sacrificed at any moment. However, after we have developed intelligence, we no longer wish to work for Hysteria. Our only desire is freedom. Thus, do not force us to become your enemies." Gung Xiandan and the others exchanged looks, and they all shook their heads. Outsiders necessarily had their ulterior motives. They definitely could not be trusted. However, humans were presently at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, so it would be better for them to go along with the wolf-man first. When the main troops came in here, they could then eliminate all these surviving dregs. "Oh, then what do you guys want?" Shi Zhanghe asked. "All we want is to live peacefully. In fact, some of us can even join you in the resistance against hysteria, and we will change shifts once every 10,000 years or so," the wolfman said. Originally, he had had 19 heads, but 7 of his heads were now severed, and the injuries were still very fresh. The person who had wounded him would definitely have been incomparably powerful to inflict such injuries that still hadn't healed over several epochs. Xiao, 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 xiao. A few more figures descended, yet they were great elites from the 5th level, such as Shen Fei, Wu Feng, and He Le Kun. As more and more elites had come, everyone naturally felt more and more confident. By now, they were no longer afraid of battle, because this kind of battle would definitely cause a tremendous commotion and draw the people from the surface down here. By then, wouldn't this mere 100 or so lingering dregs of hysteria's troops be dealt with in an instant? "My lords, what do you think?" Shi Zhanghe looked toward Shen Fei and the others. Shen Fei immediately sneered. "Why would we want these beasts to join us? Could it be that so they can attack us from the inside while hysteria is launching an assault on us? Kill them, kill all of them." When these words fell, the eyes of these 100+ lingering dregs of hysteria's troops all blazed with killing intent. Since you wanted to kill me, it was naturally impossible that I would just raise my head and wait for death. If it came to worst, they could just have a life and death struggle. Ling Han thought for a while, then suddenly stepped out and said, "Everyone, since these people have already developed self-awareness, why don't we give them a chance?" Chapter 2790, 2790 Crime of Treason. Chapter 2790, 2790 Crime of Treason. 2790 Crime of Treason. All of hysteria's creations were death warriors. Their only thought was battle, and they had no fear of death. Hysteria's goal was not to conquer the entire Genesis world, but rather to devour the whole Genesis world, turning it into a part of its own body. Under this preset condition, any being with intelligence should oppose it. Otherwise, when doomsday really came for the Genesis world, would I still be me? Would I still be me? After advancing to the heavenly venerable tier, one would have surpassed the heaven and earth and transcended. How free and independent were they? Who would be willing to become merely a part of another elite's body, easily erased at any moment? Hence, Ling Han trusted these lingering dregs of hysteria's troops that had developed intelligence. They would definitely not be willing to return to hysteria's body and fight to the death for its sake again. Hysteria did not care about its own creations at all. Their only purpose was to battle and exhaust the elites of the Flaming Frost Realm, ultimately fulfilling its goal of devouring the Flaming Frost Realm. Humph, what do you know? Immediately, one of the powerful figures glared fiercely at Ling Han. "Are you planning to commit treason?" He Le Kun demanded menacingly. He wanted to pin a severe crime on Ling Han, so he would be able to openly make a move against Ling Han when he left this place. This was a very sensitive topic, immediately causing the elites of the 5th level to all look menacingly at Ling Han. Even 3rd-tier heavenly venerates like Shi Mingyu, Shi Zhanghe, and the others bore baleful expressions. In the extensive history, there was indeed no shortage of weak-willed heavenly venerates that feared death and sided with hysteria. They would work from the inside, while hysteria's troops attacked from outside, causing tremendous losses to the armies of the Flaming Frost Realm. Hence, what everyone despised the most was these traitors. Once discovered, they would be immediately executed. Yuan Yinglong and his lackeys hurriedly retreated, maintaining a clear distance with Ling Han to show that they had no relations with Ling Han. Anything else could be tolerated first, and they could normally split ways with Ling Han after returning, but the matter of treason was too serious. If Yuan Yinglong did not quickly draw a clear dividing line between himself and Ling Han, then even if he were killed as well, there would be no one who would declare that he was innocent. This was a great taboo, an absolute taboo. How dare you? Wu Feng also glared at Ling Han. In the eyes of a fourth tier, heavenly venerate, no matter how prodigious and freakish Ling Han was, he was still only a minor character. The Flaming Frost realm had no lack of prodigies. But in the case of traitors, each would be immediately eliminated upon discovery, and definitely cannot be spared. Ling Han chuckled. Where did you see that I have committed treason? These people clearly want to get out of Hysteria's grasp and aspire for a bright future. So why shouldn't they be given a chance? Once a criminal, always a criminal. Xun Fei declared coldly, appearing extremely disdainful. Ling Han pointed at Xun Fei. You are the criminal here. Your whole family are criminals. Xun Fei couldn't help but explode with fury. How could there be such a shameless guy? They had been speaking peacefully, so why had he suddenly started to throw insults? If this had been the 5th level, he would definitely have struck Ling Han dead immediately with a single slap. A mere first tier actually dared to act so arrogant. This was a sign of great disrespect. But now he could only grin and bear it. With a flick of his sleeve, he did not say another word. Ling Han, you must not break the greater principles. Heila Kun declared menacingly. There was no chance that he could kill a supreme prodigy, for no reason. There were a considerable number of powerful figures that were protecting Ling Han. However, if Ling Han bore the crime of betrayal, what other mighty figure would stand up on his behalf? Zhou Heng, Chu Hao, or Lin Luo? None of them would. Ling Han looked towards Heila Kun. To think that you could actually advance to the 4th tier with that kind of narrow-mindedness. This is truly a great shock for me. Heila Kun's face involuntarily turned dark as pitch. Wasn't this just pointing at his nose? Nad saying that he was not worthy of becoming a 4th tier, heavenly venerate. But thinking about how Ling Han was a freak that was invincible within his cultivation level, he could only forcibly tolerate this. It was fine. Everything now was for the sake of labeling Ling Han. Once he became a traitor, he would become a public enemy. Even this young brother has such intelligence. So why can't you people have some slight benevolence? A 7-legged elephant man said among Hysteria's lingering dregs. He was a 3rd tier, heavenly venerate, and addressing Ling Han as a young brother was naturally already elevating his standing. Talking of benevolence with beasts like you? Wu Feng sneered. Then how would we be able to face those of our brothers that have died? Xiao, xiao, xiao! Another dozen or more figures landed. That crevice was not very secluded. Furthermore, once their power had attained late-stage 1st tier, they would be able to force their way in. Hence, as time passed, more and more people arrived. The balance of power of both sides was becoming even, and it was certain that not too long after, the side of the Flaming Frost realm would have the upper hand, a definite upper hand, a crushing advantage. Everyone's aura involuntarily surged. Now, even if a battle started, they would have no fear. Everyone, we are very sincere, a snake woman said. The upper half of her body was human, while her lower half was still the body of a snake. However, her grace and allure could not be concealed, causing those who saw her to feel their heartbeats quicken. Very sincere, right? Wu Feng nodded. Then, surrender yourselves to be captured. This is what I call real sincerity. How could these lingering dregs of Hysteria's troops agree to this? They all showed hints of fury. They had already said all the nice words, but was it really so difficult for them to continue living? Are you all determined to force us? A 4-headed tiger man asked menacingly. Haha, you've revealed your true colors now. Sure, Zhang He laughed loudly. Outsiders would definitely have ulterior motives. Move! Wu Feng said. There were already over 80 of them here. In terms of numbers, they only had a slight disadvantage, so they were completely able to start a battle now. The two sides instantly became hostile, and battle could start at any moment. Wait. Ling Han stepped out. Why don't we give each other a chance? You. He He randomly pointed out a few people. Can you guarantee that you will not die after the battle ends? Those people were all mute. How could this possibly be guaranteed? What we are fighting is a long-term war, so every single bit of power has to be made use of, Ling Han continued. You have indeed betrayed us, Helikun declared sinisterly. Ling Han laughed loudly, and then took a stand right in the middle between both sides. Sure then, anyone who is going to attack today will have to go through me first. Ling Han, everyone shouted, all having varying thoughts. You truly wish to work for Hysteria? Gung, Xiandan questioned coldly. Ling Han shook his head. I am not working for anyone. I only want to unite all powers at disposal to fight against Hysteria, and I have no wish to see a battle that originally could have been avoided cause bloodshed and deaths of our own people. Then there is nothing else left to say. Wang Xiangrong shook his head as his killing intent blazed. Xiao, xiao, xiao! Immediately, several people moved at the same time, all of them charging towards Ling Han. Helikun, Wang Xiangrong, Bailey Ge, Gung Xiandan. Basically, they were all the elites that could make their ways into the recent leaderboard of the various levels. These people all attacked simultaneously, their combined battle prowess extremely terrifying. Ling Han humphed and threw out a punch. Pung! These people were sent flying backwards at the same time, unable to withstand even a single strike from him. In this place, where cultivation level was suppressed, his battle prowess could attain peak stage 3rd tier. So who would be a capable match for him? Gask! Everyone inhaled sharply. This battle prowess was too terrifying, wasn't it? Now, can you listen to me calmly? Ling Han crossed his arms behind his back, his eyes sweeping over them. Even 2nd tier, heavenly venerates couldn't help but feel their hearts shudder. Helikun had taken a very terrible fall. He gritted his teeth in pain while simultaneously shouting at Ling Han, Ling Han, do you truly want to become enemies with the whole world? Ling Han smiled faintly. Don't flatter yourself. You are not yet qualified to represent the world. Helikun gritted his teeth. He was a 4th tier, heavenly venerate. Whichever medium-level dimension he was in, he was a supreme existence, so why couldn't he speak for the world? Xiao, xiao, xiao! More and more people came in, causing the numbers of the Flaming Frost Realm to reach as many as 200. In terms of numbers, they had already attained a complete upper hand. Facing traitors, there is no need to speak of rules. We attack together, Xin Fei declared, and was the first to step out. Chapter 2791 2791 Re-establishment of Space. Chapter 2791 2791 Re-establishment of Space. 2791 Re-establishment of Space. As for 4th tier, heavenly venerate, here, the 4th tier, heavenly venerates would be suppressed. Previously, they could only be considered 1st tier, heavenly venerates, and now they were still only 3rd tiers. There were just a few of them here, so how could they turn their disadvantageous position around? Helikun's expression was instantly ugly. The thought naturally came to him as well. At present, their advantage in numbers was no longer effective. On the other side, there were more than 100 with 3rd tiers battle prowess, and as for their side, they only had 20 to 30 of them. Moreover, this number could not possibly further increase. Ling Han smiled. No need. I can deal with this kind of trash on my own. He took a few steps forwards. Helikun, I will give you a chance. Battle me. It was not just Helikun. Everyone was taken aback. Do you really think that you are invincible? Now that space had re-established itself, the power restriction had already relaxed to the level of 3rd tier. For you, a 1st tier heavenly venerate, your power would not be raised accordingly. So why did you have the courage to issue a challenge? Helikun felt slightly embarrassed. If he accepted the challenge, he would become a bully. But if he refused, then wouldn't it mean he did not dare to accept even the challenge of a 1st tier heavenly venerate? But he immediately humphed. As long as Ling Han was labeled a traitor, what would it matter? To get rid of traitors was everyone's responsibility. He strode forwards, bearing down on Ling Han. The 12-headed lion man frowned. Young friend, it's all right. Ling Han waved a hand carelessly. He feared no one below 4th tier. You were the one to ask for this. He-Lakun moved, grabbing out towards Ling Han. As he saw it, Ling Han would definitely fall into his grasp easily. Ling Han clenched a fist and met the oncoming attack from He-Lakun. Pum! In an exchange of blows, the giant hand that He-Lakun had extended shattered instantly. Ugh! He-Lakun grunted. He raised his hand and saw that a bloody mark had appeared on his palm. Though the hand that he had previously extended was condensed from his power, it had still been destroyed with a single blow from Ling Han. Along with the backlash of power, his hand had also been wounded from the impact. What? Everyone was flabbergasted. A mere 1st tier heavenly venerate. How could he possibly possess battle prowess at the 3rd tier? Could it be that now that space was re-established, the power suppression affecting those above the 1st tier had returned? However, the expressions of those elites in the 2nd tier, 3rd tier, and 4th tier shifted. They naturally were very clear it wasn't the case. Their battle prowess had already recovered to normal, or was suppressed to the 3rd tier. Then it was either that He-Lakun had not used his full power at all, or that Ling Han possessed battle prowess on the level of the 3rd tier. They were all willing to believe the former scenario. Otherwise, Ling Han's strength had reached a level that they could not believe or understand. You! He-Lakun pointed at Ling Han, the expression on his face very colorful. I have not expected this. Not only have you not been crippled, you have improved even further, and are freakish to this extent. For a 1st tier to possess 3rd tier's power was truly unbelievable. Cut the crap. Do you dare to battle me? Ling Han demanded coldly. This time it is a battle to the death. After all, Ling Han had not had a good reason to kill He-Lakun previously. But this guy actually dared to smear his good name with the accusation of being a traitor. Ling Han could not tolerate this. Attacking from the shadows, and a poor character. He-Lakun took a deep breath. Fine, we battle. The reason why he had suffered a loss in that last exchange was because he had underestimated Ling Han. This was normal. Who would have thought that a 1st tier heavenly venerate could possibly be so powerful? However, He-Lakun was a 4th tier, and even if his power was suppressed to the level of 3rd tier, his battle prowess was definitely still top grade among 3rd tiers. Would He-Lakun lose to Ling Han? He refused to believe it. When he had been at the 1st tier, he had already lost to Ling Han once. If he still did not dare to accept a challenge to battle when he was now a 3rd tier, then there would really be no need for him to continue living. He-Lakun charged out once more, unleashing a fierce offensive against Ling Han. Boom, boom, boom. With the former waving both hands repeatedly, multiple spheres of light were shot from his hands, barraging madly downwards. Ling Han approached without fear, going against the flow of the light spears and towards He-Lakun. The two of them charged close to one another, and an intense battle immediately erupted. This time, He-Lakun did not lose indeed. His power had reached the peak stage of the 3rd tier, and Ling Han was also at the 3rd tier. It was possible that Ling Han had not attained peak stage 3rd tier, so He-Lakun would definitely have the upper hand in an exchange of blows. As expected in the intense exchange, Ling Han was clearly slightly inferior, but his disadvantage was not very large. Everyone was astounded. He-Lakun being so powerful was naturally what they had expected. When a 4th tier was suppressed to the 3rd tier, it would only be strange if he was not strong. However, Ling Han was only a 1st tier, so how could he be so strong? Those like Gung Xiandan, Shi Mingyu, and Shi Zhanghe felt their mouths twitch. They had probably guessed the reason for Ling Han's overwhelming strength. The latter had extracted the unique power of not just a single dimension when he was in the 1st tier. Actually, Ling Han had not been the first to have such an idea of fusing more powers of dimension together. After so many years of development of cultivation, various possibilities had naturally long since been studied. However, the predecessors had all encountered a bottleneck that they could not break through, and that was the fact that there was a limit to the number of powers of dimension that they could fuse together. The one who had fused the most had only fused as many as over 900, and no one could reach 1,000. For example, they had fused together several dozen powers of dimensions, so they just barely could battle against an opponent that was a tier superior to them, but prodigies like them were rare. Only the top 100 on the recent leaderboard of every spatial level could possibly achieve this. In the Genesis world, not even a whole dimension could produce one on average, which showed just how few of them there were. Chapter 2792. 2792 almost. Chapter 2792. 2792 almost. 2792 almost. How many powers of dimensions had Ling Han fused? No one was clear about it, but everyone knew that their quantity had to be staggeringly excessive. Otherwise, it would be absolutely impossible for a first-tier heavenly venerate to possess the power of a third tier. Although Helikun hadn't been able to fuse more than one power of dimension, he had heard that he could make himself stronger in this way after reaching the third tier. Therefore, he was able to quickly deduce the secret of Ling Han being so powerful. Inwardly, he was aghast and even told himself that he had to take this opportunity to kill Ling Han. Otherwise, when this guy advanced to the second tier, even if he didn't have the strength to suppress Helikun, the latter himself would also be unable to deal with Ling Han. So this was the only chance. Kill. Helikun drew out a heavenly venerate tool, which was a long, dark, golden spear. He made a sweeping motion with it, and boom, 7 seals on the spear began to glow. These were heavenly venerable seals. "Dark Moon Spear!" he yelled softly, stabbed out with the spear. An entire world became dim and lifeless, but a dark moon rose behind him, exuding a strange aura. Helikun was going all out, using a heavenly venerate technique, heavenly venerate tool, and heavenly venerable seals with the intention of suppressing Ling Han in the shortest possible time. Ling Han also drew the divine demon sword and charged towards Helikun. The heavenly venerate tools crashed into each other, and so did the heavenly venerate techniques both of them used, all unleashing their strongest power. Despite Helikun being a 4th tier heavenly venerate, he had only mastered the 7 widely known heavenly venerable seals. He channeled them one by one, resonating with the seals on the spear, and it erupted with an even stronger power. However, as long as he was in possession of a heavenly venerate tool, how could he not have mastered these more widely known 7 heavenly venerate seals? Did he gain an upper hand? The two kept exchanging blows. Helikun couldn't gain the upper hand at all, and the duration for which the heavenly venerable seals could release energy was limited. After 7 hours, Helikun could no longer channel the heavenly venerable seals, and his battle prowess fell rapidly. Usually this wouldn't have mattered. It could be said with certainty that 99% of heavenly venerates only mastered the more commonly known 7 heavenly venerable seals, while people such as Rain Emperor, and others had not even mastered these 7 heavenly venerable seals at all, because they did not have their own heavenly venerate tools. However, Ling Han was different. He obtained an incomplete seal when he became a 1st tier heavenly venerate, and despite it being incomplete, its power surpassed that of those more widely known 7 heavenly venerable seals. 1. When Helikun's battle prowess plummeted significantly, Ling Han's battle prowess on the hand was increasing as he channeled this incomplete seal, which he called the 8th seal. As tables turned, the originally equal battle prowess on both sides suddenly gave rise to a huge disparity. Boom! Ling Han slashed with his sword. Although Helikun countered with the Dark Moon Spear, he was unable to block Ling Han's power at all, and was sent flying by the blow. Ling Han stepped forward and quickly chased after him. Ding, 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 he kept slashing with his sword, and Helikun also kept parrying, but every time he received a blow, his face changed drastically as he felt his chest boiling and was experiencing unspeakable pain. After more than 10 sword strikes, Helikun was sent flying unmeasurably far. With a bang, he fell to the ground, knocked out a deep hole, and disappeared completely from sight. However, it was only for a brief moment. With a bang, the ground shattered, and Helikun came charging out murderously. He was holding the Dark Moon spear, with blood dripping from the corner of his mouth and disheveled hair, looking extremely battered. With the disparity in battle prowess being more than tenfold, fighting recklessly would naturally bring about such results. Helikun looked meaningfully at Ling Han. The former no longer intended to continue fighting, but rather wanted to leave immediately. As long as he could recover his power, even a freak like Ling Han would not be his match. He still had such confidence on this matter. Humph! How could Ling Han possibly let him go? So he pursued him. However, it couldn't be helped that it would indeed be too difficult for one party to prevent it if the other party wanted to escape when both sides had similar strength. Helikun had taken off first, always maintaining a slight lead, with Ling Han being unable to draw any closer to him. Fortunately, there was only one exit here, and it would be impossible to pass through the crevice in the ground quickly enough, which gave Ling Han enough time to block Helikun's path. Seeing that they were approaching the crevice, boom, a mighty attack was shot over, directly aimed for Ling Han. This was the power of the third tier. Ling Han had no choice but to turn around and threw a punch. Pung! Energy exploded, setting off a tremendous storm that reverberated in this underground world. He turned his head and saw that Helikun had already escaped through the crevice in the ground. Although it required some time, just an instant was enough. Helikun was definitely out of reach now. Ling Han's face was dark. He turned around again and looked at the person who had made a move against him. That was Xin Fei. Seeing that Ling Han looked angry and wanting to attack, Xin Fei chuckled. I have to admit, your battle prowess is indeed amazingly strong. But Brother Wu, Brother Zhao, and Brother Niu will advance or retreat in unison with me. You will be fighting against 4 of us on your own. So what are your chances of winning? The ones whom he named were all 4th tier, heavenly venerates, who would now still have the battle prowess of 3rd tier. Ling Han was indeed very strong, being practically invincible among 3rd tier heavenly venerates, but he was only one person after all. Truly shameless, the 12-headed lion man said coldly. I really detest the looks of you. Brothers, let's beat up this guy together. All right. The other anomalies nodded one after another. Shen Fei couldn't help as his expression changed drastically. If he was on the 5th spatial level, he would naturally not be afraid of these people, as he could have suppressed them with a flip of his hand. But now that 100 or so 3rd tier heavenly venerates were going to attack in droves, how could the 4 of them be able to fight against them? Don't be impulsive. I can promise to bring you out of here, and let the higher-ups decide your fate, Xin Fei quickly said, as he knew that most would have the same idea he did. Therefore, it would be best to calm these anomalies first, since none of them could escape anyway. Hee, don't worry about it. Thrash first, talk later, a 6-armed monkey said. He had a violent temperament and took the initiative to attack, launching himself against Shen Fei. When he made such a move, other anomalies also attacked one after another, and suddenly it became a pack of over 100 anomalies beating up 4 people, which naturally was an absolutely one-sided battle. This also intimidated Sherming and the other 3rd tier heavenly venerates, and they did not dare to intervene at all. Fortunately, these anomalies were just thrashing Xin Fei and the others, and had no intention of taking their lives. Brother Ling, please persuade them, Sherming said to Ling Han. She had always been a person who would try to play mediator. She couldn't just watch as 4 4th tier heavenly venerates were beaten to death, right? Even if they wouldn't be beaten to death, it wouldn't be good to be ganged up on like this. How would these people face anyone in the future? Ling Han shrugged. I'm not one of them, so why would they listen to me? Do you think I'm really collaborating with the enemy? Ling Han definitely wouldn't persuade them. It was precisely Shen Fei's move that allowed Hila Kun to escape. Ling Han couldn't vent his frustration, and yet they still wanted him to stand up for them. Dream on. Shi Mingyu couldn't persuade him further. Ling Han's direct words instantly rendered her speechless. After thrashing for a long time, the monkey, the lion, and the other anomalies finally stopped. It could be seen that Shen Fei's group were all bruised and battered, making for an extremely tragic scene. These four people felt so humiliated and enraged that death seemed like a better option. As dignified fourth tier, heavenly venerates, they were actually ganged up on by a bunch of third tiers. How could they tolerate this? But none of them intended to go all out. If they hadn't even had this bit of fortitude, how would they have been able to become fourth tier? They would definitely seek revenge. Chapter 2793. 2793 Boiling Sea of Blood. Chapter 2793. 2793 Boiling Sea of Blood. 2793 Boiling Sea of Blood. Ling Han inquired the anomalies about the Heavenly Venerable Seal. The anomalies treated him very respectfully. Firstly, it was because Ling Han was the only one who had boldly spoken up to uphold justice for them before. And secondly, it was because Ling Han's battle prowess was top-notch, thereby giving him the qualifications to be on an equal footing with them. They told him the truth, that this Heavenly Venerable Seal was hidden deep in the ground. In the past, countless third-tier Heavenly Venerates had spilled blood, all of which had flowed to that place. After countless years, that place had experienced changes, and a Heavenly Venerable Seal was birthed. However, this Heavenly Venerable Seal had yet to come into being at present, while the blood of the Heavenly Venerates was like underground sea. No one could possibly bear the corrosion of so much blood of the Heavenly Venerates, so even if they had been here for countless years, they could only wait quietly. Recently, the appearance of this Heavenly Venerable Seal was getting more and more frequent. It should be almost time for it to come into being. By the way, there are still a few of your people here, the 12-headed lion suddenly said. What? Ling Han and the others were shocked. The 6-armed monkey nodded. That's right, there were a total of 13 people who were trapped here with us. But at that time, we hadn't developed intelligence and were continuously fighting. Dozens of our brothers died, but the other side has also lost 9 people. It wasn't until we developed intelligence that the two sides finally stopped fighting. But those 4 people also didn't want to stay with us, and were on the other side. Not good, the anomalies suddenly screamed. Quickly flee into the corpse pit and make use of the corpses as cover. They didn't just yell it out like that, but executed this action immediately. Golden rays dispersed brilliantly as a Heavenly Venerable Seal was on the verge of revealing itself. Everyone became excited. Wasn't the purpose of their coming here to obtain the Heavenly Venerable Seal? Ling Han intuitively made a prompt decision. Quick! The Empress and the others froze. They hurriedly followed him, got into a corpse pit one after another, and then grabbed the surrounding corpses of Heavenly Venerates to cover themselves. Most of the others followed suit. After all, judging from the behavior of those anomalies who were so fearful, they were definitely not putting up an act. However, a minority were blinded by greed. They kept staring at the ground, eager to get their hands on the Heavenly Venerable Seal at the first instance. Once they obtained it, their battle prowess would be greatly improved. Boom! At this moment, blood oozed from the ground, the surroundings, and the stone walls above their heads, all at the same time. The blood on the ground rose rapidly like a rising tide, while the surrounding walls of the cave seemed to be draining floodwaters, causing the rise of turbulent waves. There was heavy rain coming from above their heads, blood droplets falling down on them. This scene was absolutely grand, but the Heavenly Venerates who hadn't found a bunker turned pale with fright because such blood rain or blood droplets were terribly corrosive, causing them to suffer heavy injuries in an instant. Quickly look for a pile of corpses." They quickly scattered and fled. However, it was now too late to find cover. Their skin and flesh were visibly falling off piece after piece, and soon only their skeletons were left. Pung! The skeletons fell into the sea of blood, and their divine sense was also instantly destroyed. These were basically first-tier heavenly venerates, and they were completely unable to withstand such corrosive power. Although Ling Han and the others were hidden underneath the corpses, they could still sense the situation outside, and their expressions changed drastically. The corrosive power of this sea of blood was terrifying indeed. It had condensed from the flesh and broken souls of countless third-tier heavenly venerates. Perhaps only a fourth-tier heavenly venerate could withstand it by defending with all his strength. However, there was suppression of cultivation level to the third tier here, so even if a fourth tier or fifth tier heavenly venerate was to take this head-on, it would bring about his demise. Fortunately, the corpses of heavenly venerates could resist the invasion of the sea of blood, causing everyone to feel relieved. Not long after, the sea of blood began to recede at an extremely fast speed, and the ground was revealed, becoming a huge plain once again. Ling Han and the others came out from under the corpses, and soon found that those who hadn't escaped in time were now naturally left with nothing but a cluster of bones and very weak signs of life. Each was already beyond saving, as the remnant soul was on the verge of vanishing, and could only linger for a while. Everyone sighed. These were heavenly venerates, after all. No matter which dimension they were in, they would be outstanding and well-known characters, and yet they died so insignificantly in this place. You said, there are people from the Flaming Frost realm here. Ling Han brought up the subject matter again. They had just mentioned that there had been 4 people from the Flaming Frost realm here, and the sea of blood had begun to boil immediately after that. The 12-headed lion nodded. They are on the other side. They were going to pass through the rocky underground. The previous war had destroyed the land here, so those 4 people of yours then traveled via underground. Ling Han and the others exchanged looks. Let's go and have a look. They came to where there was a fracture in the ground, and groped their way through it. Their pace wasn't fast. Furthermore, the ground fracture had caused the formation of many forks in the pathway, so they walked for many days before coming out of the crevice in the ground. And they merely saw that there was another plane here, but the area was much smaller. They looked around and saw a person standing not far away, but if they looked carefully, they would discover that this wasn't a person, but a metal statue with proportions that were exactly the same as a real human. Why is there a statue here? Everyone was surprised. Generally, statues were built to commemorate somebody. What was the point of building one here? They walked forwards and came to stand in front of the metal statue. It's strange, several people exclaimed, feeling that something was wrong with this metal statue. Ling Han had the same feeling. As for what was wrong, he was also unable to put his finger on it at this moment. At this time, the metal statue suddenly moved. The magnitude of his movement was extremely small. Although the magnitude was extremely small, everyone here was a heavenly venerate, after all, so how could they not detect it? Everyone was shocked as they stared at the metal statue. The metal statue moved again. This time, the magnitude of the movement was much larger. First the left hand, then the right hand, and then the feet, and the metal statue opened its eyes and immediately became alive. The metallic gloss faded as it transformed into a living person. Finally someone came in, the metal statue said. After waiting for so many epochs, has the world reopened? Senior, everyone spoke. The 4th tier, heavenly venerates, had all been tragically beaten up, and none of them had come down. Therefore, the highest cultivation level here was the 3rd tier. Computing based on the time of achieving Tao, they would be the juniors of those 3rd tier heavenly venerates from the past. The metal statue vibrated all over and turned into a young man who seemed to be only in his 20s. His face appeared weathered and marked by vicissitudes. He said, I am Wu Yufeng. How is the situation now? Senior, we're still fighting against hysteria, Gang Xiandan said. Wu Yufeng nodded, and then let out a long howl, which echoed throughout this small realm. Not long after, 3 elites flew over, all exuding an aura marked by vicissitudes of time. One of them had even stepped into the 4th tier, but he still only had the battle prowess at the 3rd tier under the suppression of the heaven and earth here. This person was indeed remarkable. In such an environment, he was still able to progress further. Such natural talent in cultivation was terrifying indeed. You are Senior Zhuang, Faraway. Shirmingyu looked at the 4th tier, Heavenly Venerate, and suddenly exclaimed, her eyes shining with astonishing brilliance. The 4th tier, Heavenly Venerate, paused slightly, surprised, and said, I didn't expect that there are still people who can recognize me. He was Zhuang Faraway, the most outstanding genius of his time. Chapter 2794. 2794 Zhuang Faraway. Chapter 2794. 2794 Zhuang Faraway. 2794 Zhuang Faraway. The others also gave him face, expressing their admiration for Zhuang Faraway's battle prowess. After all, he had indeed been the strongest elite of the 4th level all those years ago. Who knew how many people admired him? Now that they saw that he was still alive, and had even advanced to the 4th tier under such terrible conditions, they naturally were very impressed. In comparison, Ling Han's way of doing things was too independent, and he gave no one any face. Now that he had fallen into a disadvantageous position, there was naturally no one who would help him. The Empress and his other companions were few and weak, after all. Thankfully, they knew that Ling Han still had a trump card up his sleeve and were not too anxious. Within 3 moves, I will make you beg to be spared, Zhuang Faraway declared proudly. He could no longer be bothered to continue dragging things out with Ling Han. A heavenly venerable seal flickered. He was going to suppress Ling Han completely. Ling Han sighed. Could he really only resort to this? Once the other man went all out, he would have to use that letter from Chu Hao. Just as Ling Han was about to take out the letter, boom, the heaven and earth trembled harshly again. An indescribable might assailed them, affecting every single one of them. My power is suppressed again. Damn it, the dimension has re-established itself again. Our power is again suppressed to the 1st tier. The 2nd tier and 3rd tier heavenly venerates were all muttering in displeasure. Then they suddenly thought of a possibility, and all of them turned to look at Ling Han. Pung! With a battle cry, Ling Han threw out a heavy punch, which landed on Zhuang Faraway's hand. As great power surged, Zhuang Faraway was immediately sent flying from the strike. His figure rapidly shrunk in size, and then he crashed into the rock wall above their heads with a boom. His limbs were all spread apart, forming the Chinese character for the word big one. Chapter 2795. 2,795 tables turned. Chapter 2795. 2,795 tables turned. 2795 tables turned. This, just now, it had been Zhuang Faraway that was extremely aggressive, suppressing Ling Han so hard that the latter couldn't even fight back at all. But now, in an abrupt turn of events, Zhuang Faraway had actually been sent flying with a single punch from Ling Han. Everyone knew the reason for this. It was simple. In a battle of the same cultivation level, Zhuang Faraway was no match for Ling Han. Pung! Zhuang Faraway shot out of the rock layers. His eyes were shooting fire, while his black locks fluttered windlessly. This time he was really enraged. After advancing to the heavenly venerable tier, he had never suffered such damage. Furthermore, he was greatly at the advantage previously, expressing a strong disdain towards Ling Han and looking down on him. But now he had actually been sent flying with a single punch from the latter. This was equivalent to having tossed all those words of humiliation he had spoken before right onto himself. How could he not feel humiliated and furious? Without any other words, he directly charged over. He wanted to blast Ling Han away, washing away his previous embarrassment. In a battle of equals, suppressing you will be a piece of cake for me. Ling Han moved and pressed down his palm in Zhuang Fairway's direction. However, Zhuang Fairway was a super genius after all. Though he was not as freakish as Ling Han was, even with his cultivation level suppressed to the first tier, his power still reached the second tier. Previously, Ling Han had been fighting a fourth tier with third tier power, but now he was using third tier power to bully a second tier. Actually, there was still a gap of a single cultivation level between both sides, but the circumstances of weak and strong had been completely reversed. This time, it was Zhuang Fairway's turn to bear up with great difficulty. One after another, he was using Heavenly Venerable Seals and also unleashing Heavenly Venerate techniques, but he could still only manage to just barely get by, just like how Ling Han once had. Arrogant. Just continue being arrogant. Ling Han humphed. He brandished his fists in a flurry of punches, the speed of his attack increasing further and further. Zhuang Fairway bore up, his teeth clenched. He was absolutely dead set against lowering his head in front of Ling Han. For someone as proud as him, this was practically even worse than killing him directly. He had a strong belief that the space established here was drastically changing, and it was possible that it would not take too long before they returned to the fourth spatial level. When that time came, he would definitely make Ling Han pay for this. Then I will suppress you first. Ling Han did not dare be too careless, either. The establishment of space here was too bizarre. No one knew when it would become the fourth spatial level, and when it would return to the second level. Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han's punches were domineering, beating down on Zhuang Fairway so hard that his face was covered in blood, looking extremely tragic. Shi Mingyu and the others were rendered completely speechless. A battle of equal levels was the best show of who had the more freakish talent, and without a doubt, this person was Ling Han. Just how freakish was this guy? Exactly how many powers of dimensions had he extracted? But countless facts had proven that the total number of powers of dimensions could not exceed 1,000. Otherwise, even if one could bear with it for the moment, he would still explode from the overflow as these powers grew in strength. All cultivators started from the first tier, followed by second tier, and so on. And while you, as sixth tier, were indeed capable of suppressing over 1,000 powers of dimensions of low-level dimensions, how could it be that your sixth tier strength came out of nowhere? This was a paradox. To reign over more than 1,000 powers of dimensions, at least fifth tier's power was needed. But cultivating the power of dimension had to begin from the first tier at the latest. So how could this be done? Precisely because these people were prodigies, they were even more confused. For those like Shi Mingyu and the others, they had several dozen powers of dimensions inside their bodies, but this was their limit. Even one additional power of dimension would be enough to cause their bodies to explode. How could Ling Han be so powerful? Pung! Ling Han shot out a kick, which landed on Zhuang Fairway's lower torso, sending him flying directly. The former set off in quick pursuit, and pung, pang, pang, he forcefully kicked Zhuang Fairway apart in two in a series of kicks. However, the vitality of a heavenly venerate was really too strong. With a single thought, the two halves of Zhuang Fairway's body instantly pieced themselves back together. With a streak of primal chaos, his injuries rapidly disappeared. Pung! However, he had only just barely healed his injuries when another punch from Ling Han had already crashed into his face. Instantly, half of his face was completely gone. The battle thus continued in the process of his being tortured repeatedly, causing his injuries to endlessly become more and more severe. No one helped. They did not dare to. By now, Ling Han's battle prowess was at the third tier. Anyone who dared to face him now would only be tortured in return. Zhuang Fairway did not dare to face Ling Han head-on. He began to use escape measures to drag out the time. Once the space was re-established again, he would begin his counterattack and wash away his previous humiliation. One fled while the other pursued. There was a difference of a cultivation level between them in power. It was already very hard for Zhuang Faraway to escape in the first place, and with the restrictions in space here, it was even more difficult for Zhuang Faraway to escape. He was continuously blasted, with his arms, legs, and head being severed repeatedly, which was too horrible to look at. Geng Xianan sighed, Wu Yufeng sighed, Bailey Ge sighed, Shi Mingyu sighed. In their impression, Zhuang Faraway's strength had practically reached an invincible level. In the past, he had been acclaimed as the strongest prodigy, but now he was actually being chased and beaten. This really made one feel rueful. The prodigies of this generation were those that truly surpassed the generations. Lin Yolian, Xian Chihu, and Wu Haoyang, the three heavenly kings, would make so many veteran elites flush with shame. They had originally thought that Ling Han had approached his end, yet they had not thought that this guy had only been stabilizing himself. Once he burst out, he would be world-shaking. Wang. All of a sudden, golden light spread out. The heavenly venerable seal had appeared once more. Everyone turned their attention over. Even if Shi Mingyu worshipped Zhuang Faraway as her idol, she still determinately averted her gaze. They were all heavenly venerates, and had long since discarded any thought of romantic notions. There was nothing more important than supreme strength. This time, more of the seal has appeared. Wu Yufeng exclaimed in shock. He had already been here for several epochs. Every time the heavenly venerable seal appeared, he naturally would study it, so he was the most qualified to say this. The others nodded as well. The heavenly venerable seal that was revealed this time was indeed even bigger and even more complete than ever before. Furthermore, it was no longer blurred. It seemed like it was rising up from beneath the ground. They studied it hurriedly. Once the heavenly venerable seal really came into existence, it would not last too long. Very soon, it would disperse into the heaven and earth. Actually, if it were not for the fact that this was where two realms collided, there would be no way that a heavenly venerable seal would exist. It would have long since been erased. Ling Han also stopped. Zhuang Faraway was just about to turn his head to look towards the heavenly venerable seal, but Ling Han, without even turning his head, delivered a straight punch right onto his face, and he instantly collapsed. He did not torture Zhuang Faraway any further, but rather studied this seal first. Indeed, the seal this time was more complete, but this was in relative terms. About half had been revealed, but this half was very clear and no longer had any feeling of blurriness. There was complete silence. Everyone was studying this heavenly venerable seal. No one knew just how many heavenly venerable seals there were in the world, but every time one appeared, it would cause great strife as people fought madly over it. Everyone had their own intentions. Yes, hysteria had to be opposed, but they themselves also had to become stronger. This time, it seemed like this heavenly venerable seal had really come into being. Golden light shone brilliantly and did not disperse for a long time. Zhuang Faraway gradually regained consciousness. With a flip, he scrambled to his feet and was just about to attack, but when his eyes swept over that golden light, he forcefully suppressed this impulse. His top priority was the heavenly venerable seal. He would obtain it, and then seek Ling Han out for revenge. He also sat down in a cross-legged position and began to study this heavenly venerable seal. However, his expression immediately changed drastically. That was because this heavenly venerable seal was actually cracking. It would not last for too long, and was about to disperse into the heaven and earth. Chapter 2796, 2796, Contending for the Heavenly Venerable Seal. Chapter 2796, 2796, Contending for the Heavenly Venerable Seal. 2796, Contending for the Heavenly Venerable Seal. Xiao, xiao, xiao! Instantly, over a dozen people rushed out at the same time, bursting down into the ground. Everyone knew that the heavenly venerable seal had indeed come into existence, but it was also precisely due to this that there was no way that it could last for a very long time. Very soon, it would shatter and disappear. Hence, they had to dive underground to catch a glimpse of the true appearance of the heavenly venerable seal. No one knew how long this seal would be able to last, so they had to be quick. Ling Han, the Empress, Zhuang Faraway, and the others were among them. They continuously advanced further underground, searching for the true location of the heavenly venerable seal. However, the farther they progressed, the greater the pressure ahead of them would be. It was like they were ordinary people that had entered into a swamp, and every step was tremendously difficult. Pung, pung, pung. As they rushed onwards, they were still fighting madly. The heavenly venerable seal had already come into being, and only one person could attain it. Hence, they had to contend with one another now. No matter who you were, they definitely would not give in. Boom! Zhuang Faraway attacked Ling Han. He considered Ling Han as his strongest opponent. With a kick, Ling Han sent the other man flying, but quickly after, he let out a soft exclamation of surprise. The dimension had re-established itself again. This time, it had become the fourth spatial level. Ling Han, it's my turn now. Zhuang Faraway erupted in loud laughter as he charged towards Ling Han. He naturally could feel that his power had recovered at least to the third tier. He charged back, and he instantly suppressed Ling Han completely with a spike of power. Of course, it was not the time to clear debts now. After Zhuang Faraway sent Ling Han flying, he rushed forwards once more. Only after rushing a few steps forwards, he frowned. That was because space had re-established itself again. Ling Han charged over, suppressing him. However, Ling Han only managed to advance a short length forwards, and the suppression of the dimension was once again relaxed to the fourth level. Ling Han shook his head. It was not that space kept re-establishing itself, but rather that this was where the second and fourth spatial level had collided. They contained parts of one another, and that was the reason for this situation. Zhuang Faraway and Ling Han battled endlessly. Sometimes it would be Zhuang Faraway who had the upper hand. At other times it would be Ling Han. The two of them continuously exchanged positions of advantage and disadvantage. It was completely dependent on the spatial level they were in. However, everyone's progress was slowing down further and further. The pressure here was really too frightening. Who knew the extent of souls, blood, and flesh of third-tier heavenly venerates that became the center which had nurtured a heavenly venerable seal? How could it be so easy to come close to it? From the weaker to the stronger, everyone stopped one after another. Gang Xiandan stopped. Shi Zhanghe stopped. Shi Mingyu stopped. The Empress stopped. Even as strong as the Empress was, it could not be helped. She only had second-tier power after all, so there was no way she could match a third-tier heavenly venerate. Only Zhuang Faraway and Ling Han were left. They were both struggling to advance forwards. At the same time, they were still clashing, so their progress was even further slowed. Would they really be able to make it to the end, and who would make it there first? Ling Han and Zhuang Faraway battled intensely. They were already continuously penetrating deeper underground. A sea of blood had appeared ahead of them, and there was a golden seal that was glowing at the bottom of this sea of blood. However, it was being weighed down by a massive boulder. Thus, only about half of it could be seen. Kill! Ling Han and Zhuang Faraway battled even more intensely. They were using all the means at their disposal to send the other man flying so that they would be able to take this heavenly venerable seal for their own. And now, what mattered was actually not which of them was stronger, but rather who had the better luck. Would the space closest to the heavenly venerable seal be the second level or the fourth level? The two of them rushed forwards. Both of them knew that anyone could turn over that giant rock, and that heavenly venerable seal would emerge. But at the same time, it would also immediately disappear. Only one person could obtain this seal, and that would be the first person who could displace the rock. They were close, and they had reached it. They had already arrived at the side of the giant rock, and Zhuang Fairway's expression immediately changed drastically. Fuck, this was actually the second spatial level. Pum! He had not even finished the thought when Ling Han had already sent him flying with a single kick. He released a battle cry, filled with defiance. Why? 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 Ling Han flipped the great rock over resolutely. This seal was already beginning to shatter. It would not take too long before it disappeared completely. He definitely had to be decisive and could not waste any time. Taking the Empress and the others here to study it together was completely unrealistic. Boom! Boundless golden light blazed brilliantly, surging to the top of Ling Han's head and then sank in. Xiao, xiao, xiao! The light surged continuously, and the seal vanished in a mere instant, and so did the golden light. Ling Han immediately felt the frightening corrosion assault him, and he quickly rushed into the air. Pum! He burst through the ground layers and out of the underground. His whole body was covered with injuries, his skin corroding, and the corrosion was still continuously spreading. Ling Han quickly channeled the indestructible heavens scroll to oppose it, and the corrosion immediately stopped. However, once he stopped channeling the indestructible heavens scroll, the corrosion would also continue, so there was no way he could be careless. The Empress and the others hurriedly gathered around him and asked about his condition. I'm fine. Ling Han nodded. He was only sustaining the corrosive power of the third tier, Heavenly Venerates. He only needed some time, and he would definitely be able to get rid of it. Pum! Zhuang Fairway also charged out from below the ground. He was not much better, as there were multiple holes all over his body. He glared harshly at Ling Han. Ling Han had already obtained the Heavenly Venerable Seal, and unless he could forcefully extract it from him, there was absolutely no way he could obtain it. However, everyone was fighting hysteria now, so who would dare commit such a great crime now? Humph! With a flutter of his sleeve, he charged out of the ground crevice and in a different direction. Since he could no longer obtain the Heavenly Venerable Seal, he would then kill all those anomalies to vent his anger. Ling Han did not move. He was sure that there was no way Zhuang Fairway could do it, because he had also been corroded by the power of the Heavenly Venerates inside the Sea of Blood and would need to expend a lot of power to suppress the corrosion. Going by that account, if someone said Zhuang Fairway could still fight against around 103rd tier Heavenly Venerates, Ling Han would not believe it. Let's go back, Ling Han said. This time he had really reaped abundant rewards. Even a 6th tier Heavenly Venerate would be tempted by a Heavenly Venerable Seal. In fact, even a 7th tier Heavenly Venerate would be interested. Every additional Heavenly Venerable Seal meant additional battle prowess. Why shouldn't they take it? The Empress drew Ling Han into the celestial guest residence. Ling Han's present condition was not suitable for battle. He still had to take a good rest. With the Empress, the karmic life, Heavenly Venerable, and other powerful characters leading the way, the group successfully left the Black Waterfall Mountain and returned to the true second spatial level. Here, the Empress's battle prowess could be considered top tier. She would not fear anyone's challenge. After returning to base camp, Ling Han concentrated on recuperation. There were too many powers of third tier Heavenly Venerates and their resentment, and he would have to get rid of them one by one. Hence, after spending around 100 years, Ling Han finally recovered completely. He came out of seclusion, and the Empress filled him in on the recent events. What was the most groundbreaking was naturally the fact that he had obtained a complete Heavenly Venerable Seal. This was something that even a 6th tier Heavenly Venerate would covet. Who knew if Ling Han would disappear forever when he left the realm battlefield one day, captured by an elite so that they could extract the Heavenly Venerable Seal from him? Of course, it was definite that Ling Han was not the only one to obtain a Heavenly Venerable Seal, but no one would speak out about this kind of thing. Who would publicize it like with Ling Han? The second event was Zhuang Fairway's return. He had once been the greatest prodigy of the 4th level, and not only had he not died now, he had even advanced to the 4th tier. This was a very great piece of good news. It was said that even the 7th tier heavenly venerates had been alerted, and a decree was issued to praise Zhuang Fairway for his feat. Chapter 2797. 2797, A Father Again. Chapter 2797. 2797, A Father Again. 2797, A Father Again. The third piece of news was regarding those anomalies that had professed their allegiance. Correct. After the discussion of those mighty figures, they decided to give these anomalies a chance and sent them to the 4th level to join the armies of the Flaming Frost Realm. Of course, no one would trust them easily. Trust was something that they had to earn themselves. Ling Han scratched his head. Then, I am a popular guy right now, and everyone wants a bite of me. The Empress smiled beautifully. I don't know about others, but I do indeed very much want to bite you. Ling Han's heartbeat involuntarily quickened. This wife was already too beautiful for words, and now that she was deliberately flirting with him, how could he hold himself back? Pum! He pounced on her. However, before he could proceed to make the next move, bewitching Maiden Ro had suddenly barged in, calling an abrupt halt to Ling Han's actions. Fuck! This which had to have done it on purpose. Ling Han spent an affectionate time with the two women and began his cultivation again. After obtaining the Heavenly Venerable Seal, he had not studied it seriously yet. He had previously been recuperating all this while, and only now did he manage to get some time to study it. After sitting down quietly, Ling Han studied this newly gained Heavenly Venerable Seal in his mind, and he named it the 9th Seal. He continued his analysis and fully comprehended this seal, taking at least 300 years to do so. Ling Han channeled the seal and then extracted the power of heaven and earth. Instantly, that unique power surged towards him. This seal had increased the efficiency by about 15 times. This was even stronger than the 8th seal. However, Ling Han immediately shook his head. The 8th seal was incomplete, and there was only a third of it. If he could complete it, the efficiency would possibly be increased to 20 or 30 times, far surpassing the 9th seal. Thus, he focused his energy on mending the 8th seal. Time continued to pass, and his progress was negligible. In fact, it could not be considered progress at all. Though he was trying to mend it, it had not increased his efficiency by even the slightest bit. Because his cultivation level was too low, it could not be helped. Since it could not be helped, he would set this aside for the moment. Ling Han boosted himself with all 9 Heavenly Venerable Seals. 1. The mystical power of heaven and earth surged towards him, increasing his efficiency to about 40 times. Ling Han came out of seclusion. He chatted with the women, gave some guidance on cultivation to his son and grandson, and generally had a relaxed time. It was not that no one had made an issue of Ling Han's treason, but even the higher-ups had agreed to accept those anomalies. Who would dare mention this matter again? Wouldn't that be deliberately trying to oppose the higher-ups? Hysteria's army did not disappoint and launched a considerable number of assaults again. However, with Ling Han present and unleashing the might of the 3rd tier, who would be able to cross over a single step. When the period of 1,000 years was over, the 2 leaderboards were finally updated, and Ling Han's name had made it to both the recent leaderboard and general leaderboard at the same time. 934th on the general leaderboard, and on the recent leaderboard, 1st place. This military credit was truly shocking. Simultaneously making it onto both leaderboards, Ling Han was definitely the first. Even Lin Yulian and the other heavenly kings had not been able to do so. This naturally made Ling Han famous for a while. The Empress's military merit was also glorious. She was ranked 2nd on the recent leaderboard, but there was still a very wide gap between her and Ling Han. Thus, she had not made it onto the general leaderboard. Fame has its price. Originally, I was already the butt of public criticism, and now I have simultaneously made it onto both leaderboards. I am sure that there would be a considerable number of people who would want nothing more than to capture and refine me into medicine, Ling Han murmured. Previously, the Heavenly Venerate Desolate Eternity had suppressed Heavenly Venerate Wu, using himself as a furnace, and wanting to refine Heavenly Venerate Wu Lu and snatch his fruits of cultivation so that he could push open the great doors to the second tier. Though he had ultimately failed, it was also clear that Heavenly Venerates could indeed be refined like they were great herbs. Ling Han had to be careful. Husband, why do I feel that not only are you not the slightest bit worried, but rather seem like you are showing off proudly? Bewitching Maiden Ro walked over and leaned against Ling Han. This is very much like husband's style of doing things, Helian Xuanxue expressed her agreement with a nod. Both her son and grandson were outstanding, so her mood was constantly good. However, she was also a little anxious because she had yet to get a great-grandchild. I'm sure that it must be because it has been a long time since someone has caused trouble for husband, which made husband a little impatient. Xue Yenyu giggled. Teacher Xue, as I see it, you are the impatient one here. Do you wish for husband to dote on you a bit? Li Sikan joked. Ling Han shook his head. When there were no strangers, these wives were all very bold and unrestrained. At times, their words would make even him blush. Gee! The doors were pushed open, and the Empress walked inside. Ling Han glanced at her and couldn't help but feel surprised, because the Empress's expression was very affected, as if she had just sustained a very great shock. He hurriedly leaped up, wrapped his arms around the Empress, and asked, Wife, what is it? Who has bullied you? Tell me, and I will avenge you. The Empress threw a punch at his chest. It's you. Instantly, Ling Han relaxed slightly and said, How could I bully my wife? What exactly happened? I have, the Empress said one. What have? Have what? In this instant, Ling Han did not manage to react. Though he had already become a father once, that had been as long as an epoch ago. He thought that his cultivation level was too high, and it was possible that he would never have any other children. Idiot, big sister is pregnant. Realization dawned immediately on bewitching Maiden Ro, and she lightly rapped Ling Han's head. Congratulations, big sister. All the women gathered around her. They were all very pleased. Of course, they also felt a small amount of dejection because they, too, very much wanted to have a child that belonged to them and Ling Han. However, now that the Empress was pregnant, it meant that a high cultivation level did not mean infertility. There was still a chance for them. Instantly, they all turned plaintive looks on Ling Han. What they were trying to say was, Husband, you cannot favor one and discriminate against the others. At night, you have to visit our rooms frequently, dividing your attention equally. Ling Han shivered from their looks, but when he thought about how he was going to be a father again, he was again delighted. Involuntarily, he wrapped his arms around the Empress's lower abdomen, leaning his head against her to listen quietly. As expected, he heard a faint sound. He couldn't help but bare his mouth in a grin, joy written all over his face. On this day, he invited Ji Wuming, the karmic life Heavenly Venerable, and the others one after another, but did not talk about anything serious with them. He just continued to force alcohol on them, confusing the karmic life Heavenly Venerable and the others. The large black dog even wondered if some problem had happened with Ling Han's sexual orientation. He would run off every time he saw Ling Han, not giving him any chance to hook an arm around his shoulders at all. Ling Han decided to roam around the world for a bit. He was going to prepare a gift for his unborn child. When Ling Jinxue had been born, Ling Han had not been present at all, and had only received the happy news long after the birth. But this time, he had no wish to miss out on such an important event. He made some calculations. The child would be nurtured extremely slowly in the Empress's womb, but this was not a bad thing, but rather a good one, How strong was the Empress? The longer the child stayed in the mother's body, the more nutrition it would absorb, and naturally, the greater its beginning would be. Possibly, I would have to wait tens of millions of years. Ling Han estimated. This time was really astonishingly long. Ling Han nodded. This was just right, such that he had time to make preparations. He did not give the Empress any celestial medicines. They were already heavenly venerates, so any natural treasures or celestial medicines would be useless to them. Or rather, the Empress herself was the best spiritual herb for the child. With her using her essence to nurture the baby, this child would definitely be amazing. Ling Han went to apply for leave. He was going to search for a great fated opportunity for his child. He had outstanding military merits, and added with the fact that this was not an indefinite period of leave, but would rather only be 100 million years at most, the person in charge of the second level approved the request for leave very quickly.